All right, we're going to go back into session here and go into DS 17-093, discuss proposed FY 17-18 budget to include internal service fund, aviation fund, capital improvements, debt service fund, and special revenue funds. And Mr. Olson, it's on you.
Thank you, Mayor. As you can tell, my voice is very weak. I'm going to say a few things today, and then I'm going to turn the microphone over to Dennis, who's going to walk you through the rest of the budget. Last week, as we presented and discussed the budget, there were a number of questions that the council asked. We kept track of those questions, and we have answers here. If we can pass those out to the council. And then I will just say, if you have any further questions about the memorandum that you're receiving, if you just call me, I'll answer them personally for you. Today, well, previously we've had extensive discussion with the City Council about the entire city, the all funds summary of what's happening in our budget across the entire municipal enterprise. We've talked about the general fund. We've talked about the water and sewer fund. We've talked about the solid waste fund. And tonight we are going to talk about the balance of the city's operating funds. We're going to start with the airport, and then we'll just work from there all the way through the third book that you have. So with that, I'm going to turn it to Dennis and let him take it from here.
Good evening, Mayor, City Council, City Manager, and City Attorney. We're going to go ahead and start with the Aviation Killeen Fort Hood Regional Airport Fund Summary, and we'll go into Skylark discussion, and then after I'm done with the summary, turn it over to Matt from Aviation, and he'll go ahead and give you a little bit more specific information. The Killeen Fort Hood Regional Airport is a fund enterprise that provides regional passenger aviation services to the residents of the city. These funds are used to account for operations that are financed and operated in a manner similar to a private business, and it is where the intent of the governing body is to recover the costs associated with those services on a continuing basis to be captured through primarily user charges. Next slide, you'll see how the fund fits into the enterprise. The aviation fund's 2% on this particular pie chart. It's the smallest of the ones represented. The next slide are the donut charts. On the far left is a 2007 actual, and then to the right of that you have a fiscal year 17 and a fiscal year 18 proposed to give you a closer comparison. On the outer ring of those donut charts are the revenues that are generated, and the inner portion of those pie charts are your expenses. If you look at the 2007 actual, you'll notice that the revenues exceeded expenses fairly well. You go back to over to the fiscal year 17 estimated actual, you'll see that there's less revenues than what the expenses were during that time frame, and the same thing occurred during 2018 proposed budget. And we'll get into a little bit further. You'll see how that is being addressed through the aviation as a whole, both through Skylark Field fund balance and regional airport fund balance. We'll address that. The next slide goes into the revenue budget itself. These are where the dollars are coming from in order to make up that $2.5 million. One of the challenging areas you'll see drop off a little bit, but was about $11,000 was airport parking fees. That's an issue that will probably need to be addressed sometime in the future, but as the next slide shows, there's no change in fees being proposed in the parking rates at this particular time. The parking rates right now on the next slide shows you from a 31 to 60 minute time frame for short-term and long-term parking lot. It's $1, and you'll see respective of the amount of time you spend in relation to the dollars spent up to a maximum of $60 for a short term. The next slide talks about expense categories by fund, by this particular fund. You'll look again, you have a 2007 actual, and then again the 2017 and 18 comparison. We already talked about how the expenses and revenues looked in previous years. In this particular year, you'll see that same number, 2.5 million in revenues and a 2.6 million in expenses issue. The next slide breaks that down in more detail, talks about where those dollars are going. And of course, personal expenses, personal expense, your operations, capital outlay, things of this nature are what we're looking at for an expense. Some of the ones that you'll see on this page, I'm sorry, if you'll back up. On this page, you'll see there's an asterisk next to certain ones, and those are dealing with the Internal Service Fund, and that will be spoken of at a different time in a different presentation. The next slide, beginning fund balance, if you'll see, and I'm just going to go from the very top line, beginning fund balance, all the way over, it's 243,664 on the proposed budget. If you took that number, which are our beginning fund balance, and look at our revenues and our expenses, I'm still on the 2018 side, you'll see that right there is 103,888 difference. If you added those two, the 243,664 and the 103,888, that will make up your 347,552 deficit that you see reflected there, which is a 13% drop. And again, I'll talk about how that's addressed later on. Next slide talks about FTE staffing. You can see the historical information from 2015-16, but right now it's at 36.34. If you move to the next slide, you'll notice that staff moved to an internal service fund. The actual FTEs is actually declined by 1.66 in this particular fund. Next slide, change in staffing. You will see a 0.66 represented here. That is because it is budgeted through, or if you will, funded through January 31st of 2018. I'm going to go right into the Skylark field, and that will help address some of the deficit representations you saw earlier. The Skylark field is also an enterprise fund. Here we go. And it provides local commuter and hobby aviation services to the residents of the city. It also is a fund that accounts for operations that are financed and operated in a manner similar to the private business, with the intent by the governing body to capture those costs of services to the general public on a continuing basis that are recovered primarily through user charges. The next slide pulls out that fund. It's again, an aviation fund. It's similar to the first one you saw at 2%. The next slide goes back to the donut charts. In this particular fund, you see, again, historical information for 2007, and again, 17 and 18 comparison. Focusing more on the proposed budget on the far right, you'll see on the outer band, again, is the revenues, the inner is the expenses of that pie representation. The total revenues, again, is less than expenses by about 153,000. For the next slide, you'll get a little bit more of an idea where those revenues on that outer band are derived from. The next slide talks about rental rates. There's no change in rental rates being proposed at this time. Skylark Field Fund rental rates, as you notice, the T hangars rentals A through H, and then the N units A and B, the amount that they rent per month is reflected there. The next slide is the expense categories. Again, the 2007, and again, of course, the 17-18 comparison. The numbers on the bottom right of that last pie chart you'll see are reflective of what you saw on the revenue slide as well. It does show that the revenues are coming in under expenses, which is of a little concern. However, and it's been spoken of by the city manager in previous discussions, that is something that is being worked on by the Aviation Department and staff in his office to address. But ultimately, for this particular budget, I'm going to the next slide, if you will. You'll see that the expense side of the house, 552, where that expense is actually made out, or made from. The next slide talks about the fund balance, and that's pretty much the message I'm wanting to convey, is that this fund balance will be able to keep the aviation afloat for some time, but it's near term. I'm talking 3 to 5 years. Over that time, something will need to be addressed, be it fees, be it cutting expenses, or a combination. That said, if you took the beginning fund balance on fiscal year 18 at 641,294, and you showed right down in the middle of that, you'll see the net change fund balance of 153,316. So you take that number from the 641, and that will leave you at 487,978, or 88% fund balance percent. Skylark Field Fund staffing right now is at 3.34 for the proposed budget. And the next slide talks about the FTEs from 4 down to proposed budget is 3.34. There's a difference of 0.66, and again, that's a position in the aviation operations that is budgeted through January 31st, 2018. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have if it's about what I presented. If not, we have Matt that will come up and present the two departments.
Matt's making his way up.
Okay.
Mr. Okrie.
Yes, sir. Mr. Mayor, we go back to the very first slide where you had the pie chart. You notice there for Killeen Fort Hood Regional Airport, and noticing was it year 2006 to 2007 with the federal grants and the intergovernmental funding is like 51%, and there was another value there.
49%, right.
And then we go over to the next one. The first one is, you have like 50 something, and then you have with a 24%, I believe. For the 24, it was.
You on the
No,
revenue or on the expense
this is the
side?
correct one.
This is the correct one?
Yeah, moving from left to right. When you talk about the revenue, we have intergovernmental and then federal, and there are values there. But the difference between those values from 2007 to 17, between those two, intergovernmental is about a 30% decrease in funding, and also with the federal. And then when you move over to 2018, there's about 1% federal funding and practically nothing interlocal. So my question is, it was strong here in 2007, but over time.
The best person to answer that question will be Matt. Let me go ahead and give him to you now.
Okay.
And if there's anything follow-up, we'll do that. But I think
Okay.
a lot of that he can answer fairly quick.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir, and I'll do my best. A lot of that is because we've moved the grants out of our operating fund into its own separate fund. So you're not going to see that as part of our operating capital anymore. It's in a separate fund. We're going to show you that in this next brief. Hopefully that should peak to answer some of your questions as we get to that. So, yes, sir.
Thank you.
Anybody else? All right, Matt.
Thank you, sir, Mr. Mayor, Council. Killeen, our mission is to provide a safe, responsive, and efficient airport system. We have several mission elements to do that. One of those is to maintain airport-run facilities and equipment, manage airport operations, and plan and develop the airport. I would like to point out one thing. You're going to see the same mission, and you're going to see some of these same mission elements when we talk about Skylark, because we're an aviation system. And as that system, we manage our airports as part of that system with our mission and some of our elements. We'll refine those as we go on year after year with both of these. How do we do that at this airport? Let me see. The maintaining airport operation facilities, we respond to work orders, and those are tenant work orders within 2 hours. The managing airport operations, it's the daily airport inspections. We do a minimum of 4 of those a day. Those are the inspections that we do. Robert Gray Army Airfield does our own inspection, so actually we have more than that each day. That includes airfield and facilities, so the terminal and the parking lots, so at least 4 a day. And then plan and develop airport, which is very important, and that's the initiation of projects identified in our annual CIP. We have a 3-year rolling CIP that we're required to present to the FAA, and we follow that CIP. So what we like to do is implement 100% of the projects that we have projected in that year, and we plan our funding for that. What are our goals for this upcoming year? We want to complete our airport master plan, which is currently underway. We want to complete the final design for the passenger boarding bridge project. If you remember, that was in the PFC that we brought to you. We want to bid that passenger boarding bridge project once we get it completely designed. We want to procure and install an upgraded flight information display system and common use computer system. And then we want to design and build the rental car quick turn facility car wash improvements. And the design and planning for that is underway. We talk about our staffing. All of our staffing is within our fund, and we're 2.83% of the total enterprise fund for the city. How does our budget fit into this? Our budget is managed by 91% of our budget is wrapped around our own operational funds, and approximately 8.49 is the funds that they talk about, the non-departmental charges that they will talk about later on. And we're approximately 1.35% of the total enterprise within that. As previously mentioned, we're going to have 36.34 positions at the end of the year. We are downgrading 2 positions. One is a principal secretary, and then we have an unfunded service worker position that we won't be filling this year. Our budget, as we talked about, we'll have a balanced budget. We plan on spending approximately $2,436,249. How are we going to get there, and why is there a variance from our previous ones? We've moved those grants out of our operating budget now into a separate fund to manage them better. Very good move, smart move to do that. We reduced our tech stock grant based upon what our budget cap was. If we make more money this year and we can spend more money, then we will put that back into our tech stock grant because that's a 50-50 match. So we spend 50% for any of the projects that we use. We lost a food vendor. That wasn't surprising to us. We have air carrier activity and landing fees. The air carrier activity is less because we have some larger airplanes, so we have less airplanes coming in. So with less flights coming in, you make a little less money on the landing fees that we get. And then those revenue sources from new and existing revenues that we have. Some of the new revenues are that we do our own charter operations service, and we provide security services for various charter airlines at different airports around our Central Valley area. So we move on to our expense budget. You see that we've balanced it with our operational budget at $2,436,000 and $249,000, and that's a change from last year. Let's see how we get there. Once again, we moved those AIP grants. We've unfunded 2 positions. And we've reduced several accounts, as you can read here, that you've had the opportunity to look at. Now let me talk about some of the special programs that we have, and this is where we're a little bit different than some of the other departments. Here's that first special program that we moved into with our airport improvement program and with the 524 and the 525 accounts. These are our AIP grants and the projects that we have this year and coming up next year. And as you can see, we've done a variety of projects this past year, including the airport master plan, which we're paying for, and we'll continue into 2018, the wildlife reduction equipment, some of the passenger boarding bridge work. Next year, we have more of the passenger boarding bridge work, and that one that you see for fiscal year 524, that's to finish the design, complete the design that we want to do. Then fiscal year 18, our main project is going to be this passenger boarding bridge project. It's almost a $6 million project that we're going to undertake. Next project we want to look at is the passenger facility charge project. That's the $4.50 charge on each ticket that you have for people that fly out of our airport or into our airport. We see the projected numbers that we have. The important things here to look at the various projects that we're funding through this, the master plan, the wildlife hazard reduction, the boarding bridges phase 1 and 2, and then ultimately into the final phase 3 project of that. We're paying for the flight information common use system. We're doing a rehabilitation of airport lighting vault and engineering analysis of that to look at. And then our miscellaneous expenses. The important thing to know about these projects are the PFC, the AIP fund you looked at first is normally a 90% match, or 90% of the total project cost. We match that cost with 10% from the passenger facility charge. What's the next net cost to airport operating? 0. So we manage that very carefully so that we're not using airport operating for this type of fund at this time. The last fund we'd like to talk to you about is our CFC, the customer facility charge for the rental cars. That's your charge that's paid for every person that rents a car at the airport. That's not necessarily passenger at the airport. We get a lot of people who come to the airport just to rent their vehicles. The military is a big customer doing that. They rent a lot of their vehicles there. We use these for a lot of different projects that we have for that. Now we're going to be doing some car wash facility improvements, rebuilding that facility for them. And later on, we'll get into the rental car lot facility covered parking. That's going to be another major project that we have that's going to benefit both them and us. So we have funds, we have plans for this, and we're moving forward. The net cost to the airport for these is zero. That's important to know. We had several decision packages we put in front of the city manager for core services to fund an airport specialist position, providing equipment, and you see the provide equipment and services for airport charters and business. That makes us money. So does the continuation of ground security coordinator travel and training. That makes us money. We have to request some money so that we could travel to try and continue our air service and to reinstate an aircraft fuel handler position to do that. We did have one package disapproved by the city manager. This one is important to know. This is an intergovernmental service agreement. And this wasn't approved because it hasn't been fully accepted by Fort Hood yet. And I just said that. It's sitting with Fort Hood right now. They're doing their final reviews. Upon their final review, and we can get this project signed off, brought to council, and done, then you'll see the budget amendments going forward. Notice that it will make us money next year to do this. So it's a project that we've been working on for the past, gosh, almost 12 months now to get this done. This is something Fort Hood wants very badly, and we're in a great position to provide these services to do this. We're very excited about this project. And with that, we have some city manager comments. His voice is hurting, so.
I have a question on the facility charges. When the airport is losing money, is that are we able to raise facility charges? What kind of effect would that have on?
Are you talking about the customer facility charge?
Yeah, where you said that you charge them for flying in and out?
That's the passenger facility.
Passenger, yeah.
We charge $4.50
That
now,
one,
which is
yeah.
the maximum. There is legislation going through Congress to do one of two things, either make it an unlimited cap or raise it to between $8 and $10. I do not foresee any reason for us to change what we have now. There's no benefit at this time with the programs and plans that we have in place to even consider looking at that now. What we have now is perfectly adequate for what we're doing and what we're working with.
Where I was getting at is if we needed to raise money, we can't do it there because that's capped by law, right? That's by.
What we charge is capped by law. How much we want to appropriate is only capped by the projects that we submit that are approved by the FAA.
Yeah.
If you remember, we brought that program to you about 2 months ago, to get approval to submit it to the FAA with the projects that we have been working with the FAA, and we're submitting that this week.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Okray.
With that restriction on using the funds, does that mean that, but you're talking about proposed federal legislation? Is it proposing taking restrictions off of using those funds, raising those passenger facility fees, and also the use of the revenue that is generated?
That's a great question, and the answer to your question is yes, no, no, no. It allows airports the potential to raise that passenger facility charge, and that's something that typically you bring in front of council or something and say, hey, are you comfortable with this or are you not comfortable with this? What you can do with that money is still going to be bounded by FAA restrictions and what they have. So you're still going to have to go through the same process, say these are the projects we want, these are the projects and how much they're going to cost, and this is how we're going to allocate X amount of dollars for each project as we go through. So that's all your no's. That will still be regulated very closely. I'm just saying that this is the legislation that has been put in front of Congress. It just passed, I believe, one senatorial committee for that. I don't know where it's going to go. It's been turned down for the last several years. It just depends on how they want to implement their budget going forward.
So if you raise $1 million, but you only have $250,000 in projects, you can only spend that $250,000 for the project.
That's right, and the rest you have to give back to the airlines. If you over-collect, you always give back to the airlines.
Gotcha.
Because that's revenue that you haven't used. What we do, of course, is not that. We plan so that we match the funds to the projects that we're working in to do two things. One is that we have the right amount of money in the project to work with, and two is we don't ever let an application expire, because once you let an application expire, we want to continue collecting money so that we can continue doing our projects. If you let that money expire, then it's a very lengthy process to start the whole process back up again.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Mrs. Fleming.
I just have one question. I hope it's relating to the aviation and what you're doing. It might be out of order, but cut me off if I start this and it's out of order.
No, ma'am, I wouldn't do that. That's up to you.
Okay, Mr. Mayor. Okay, what I was asking, it's Killeen Regional and with Fort Hood, right? Right now. You have those two entities with the airport, right? Have you ever considered bringing in like Belton, Coppers Cove, other entities to fall under the umbrella so that it would help bringing in more money and more revenue if we had other entities to belong to this airport under one umbrella? You see where I'm getting at?
Yes, ma'am, I see your question, and I think that's a question to defer for a later discussion. I think that's
Okay,
a
thank
very
you.
complicated
I thought it was.
It is.
thing to answer.
That's why I said that. Thank you, sir. We'll
Yes,
talk
ma'am.
about this later, because it just hit my mind if we could just organize something like that.
They can always use it. COVID always, they all part of it. They just,
Okay, I just
Yeah.
wanted to know about it. Thank you, sir.
Question, because I had the same question.
yeah. Well, that may be something that we'd have to discuss at a later time, bring up as a item. And I'm sure he's going to do that because I know we're working on the marketing plan and all that other stuff too. So maybe that would be a better opportune time. So anybody else got anything? All right.
Okay, let's move on to Skylark Field. We'll start with our mission. You've seen this before, provide a safe, responsive, and efficient airport system. How are we going to do that? Maintain airport-owned facilities and equipment, manage airport operations. Here's a new one, manage leased property within the airport, and plan and develop the airport. We manage our airport-owned facilities by spending up to 30% of our maintenance costs on preventative maintenance, so things don't break. We manage airport operations with the number of daily inspections we do there. We manage the leased property within the airport. Time to respond to tenant work orders, 8 hours. And once again, plan and develop airport initiation of projects identified within our annual CIP, which is what we want to do. What are we trying to do for this next year? We want to market our business opportunities, and then we want to complete the design and commence construction of the T-hangar facility. This one is altered a little bit since this was written a while ago. We plan to complete our T-hangar facility by next year, and that's good news when we get into the revenues and expenses as we come up later. So that's going to be very important. We have 3.34 employees. 100% of our FTEs are within the Skylark Fund. It's a very small percentage of the overall enterprise. How we fit into the budget, same definition before. The non-departmental is about 3%, and we're a very small percent of the overall enterprise that we have. We're going to go down to 3.34 positions. That'll be explained in just a little while. And our revenue for this next year will be approximately $535,967. And we'll look at some of that in our decision packages. How do we get that? We've reduced our estimated price and our cost of goods. We decreased our operational supply and sales. We decreased our fixed-based operations a bit with the leases that we have. We've reduced our tech stock grant that we've talked about. And we'll get into a revision of codified fees, as the city manager has explained. Once the entire budget season is done, we'll move on from there, and then we'll talk about fees and various things like that, and what we want to do, what we will recommend to do for rents with the new hangar coming online and everything. Our expense budget will match our revenue budget at $535,967. With this, we've reduced the quantity and price of fuel to be sold. We've unfunded 2 positions, the accounting specialist and aircraft fuel handler. And we've due several accounts for you to look at. We had a couple decision packages here that the city manager approved. One was the revision of T-hangar rental rates, which once again we'll discuss after budget season comes up, and reinstating our account specialist position. We didn't have any decision packages disapproved by the city manager, and the city manager did not have any comments for this airfield. And I'll answer any questions you may have.
Questions? Seeing none, continue on.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Baldwin, you're back up. Mr. Kilpatrick.
Mr. Mayor, make a move that prior to the next complete different budget, item number RQ 17004, over half of the attending audience is interested in that. it could be another hour, an hour and a half before.
And we can do that, you know, that was suggested earlier, but Mr. Harris was not here, so I didn't want to move it up without Mr. Harris being here, and now that he is, if the council is okay with that, so that way everybody doesn't have to be here, we can move that item up. So before we finish on the presentation, I'm just going to go ahead and do that, if you guys don't mind. So we're just going to go on to RQ 17-004, future agenda items, and discuss temporary stop on residential home platting and construction. And Mr. Harris, this is your item.
But I'll just go ahead and wing it. I won't read it. I'll just go ahead and wing it. But the reason I brought this up was simply because I have a concern that, as I talked about before, about balanced growth in the city. And with that, seeing what I've been seeing, hearing what I've been hearing, even from residents, even things from myself and so forth, I thought it would be a good idea to go ahead and put a pause real quickly, just put like a 3-month pause, or even before that, depending on how long it would take to look at at our future land use map. And to go back and look at it again to determine if we are actually, that map actually reflects balanced growth in the city. And when I say balanced growth, I mean between homes, businesses, and other things as well, parks and all that stuff, just balanced growth in the city. And the reason I proposed 3 months, of course, is as far as the flume map, it would probably take like a few months to get done, or it may go faster depending on how the process of it. But the reason I did 3 months as well is because even as I looked at the email from yesterday saying how many permits were issued every month, or 51 per month or something like that for residential permits, then my thought is basically this: that that builders have I guess if you want to say, they still have houses to build out. Because if we have 51 a month, and we've been having 51 a month, surely all 51 haven't been getting built in 1 month. So there's still work to do, okay? And so the 3-month period would minimize the time in which some construction workers may be off of work. But at the same time, I look at it, we have to look at our flume and determine whether or not we're having balanced growth. Because if we're not, then once damage is done, damage is done. We need to make sure that we have the right amount of land that's out there, the right land designated for what we're looking for Killeen to be and Killeen to grow into as we go into the future. So, like I said, with that right there, I'm just looking out for the best interests of Killeen. And I know that there is a possibility that a few people, like I said, I'm not predicting to be many, if any, would be out of work because of the backlog of homes and everything they had to build anyway. But if that happened, then I have to say in this particular sense that even as I know missing a few paychecks will make a dent, it will hurt, but the future of Killeen as a whole is more important than that. And so I believe that this is something that we need to discuss, and if you don't agree with me on the way I'm suggesting it, that's fine, but we need to have this discussion about the flume to make sure we're having balanced growth. I just think it's responsible, and I'll say this, like I said, if you don't agree with the approach I'm taking, then you can vote it down in discussion, but at the same time, we need to do something.
Council, is this something you guys want to move forward on? Mr. Kilpatrick?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I cannot understand, nor will I ever agree at this time, when we're trying to fight the balancing of budgets. Not only, city manager has a very definite plan to do a 18/19 budget. So what we do here in, quote, reducing any revenues in 17 or 18 will impact our 19 budget. So little studies on, 2 studies show that for every house that's being built, new home, 178 workers work on at the high level of the National Builder Association, goes on the low level and says 117 per house. That's not just a few people missing a paycheck. You put a moratorium for 90 days. Right now we have a 3.2 month backlog in our homes. In 2010, we had a 6.7. The national average for a balanced economy says 6 months backlog. We'll burn that 3.2 months of backlog out while we stop building. We stop issuing permits. We stop allowing planning decisions to be made, which it will take another 30 to 90 days after we decide to go do this again for it to generate again to do that. During that time, we may have lost as many as 3 to 5 of our local builders here because they can't sustain it. Therefore, they'll build. In 2004, we, in the city of Killeen, we issued over 900 more building permits per month than Temple. In 2017, they now issue 75 more building permits than Killeen, and they're half the population. They're growing like everything. We can't put a sign out in our city limits that says, people don't come to Killeen and want a new house because we've stopped building until we decide what we want to do as a balanced growth. We can do the same. We can do it simultaneous. We've done it and done it and done it. Back in 2000, or 1999 to 2004, when we had our most expansions of growth, we did the very same thing. We developed the flume, we developed the plan, at the same time we developed developments. It is almost incomprehensible. And the worst thing about it is, I don't want to discuss it until the city attorney gets into it, because there is a subchapter E, chapter 212 of the local government code says this may be illegal. We have to have public hearings to even identify that whether a city can put a moratorium, and then you must have define it as based upon a shortage of essential public facilities. They are defined as water, sewage, storm drainage, or street improvements. You can't, a city just can't stop me as a private citizen saying, I want to build a new home on my property, my right to do so, and you're not going to issue me a permit for it. Because of why? Unless you have a specific defined reason under state statute that says you have a shortage of facilities and you can't do that. So until we have legal decisions, even if it's adoptable, we're wasting our time and as an agenda item on my part. I will vote no.
So here's his vote. That's what we need, a consensus to either kill this or move it forward.
That's what
We're wasting time.
little
Thank you.
clarity.
Mr. Harris wants to offer a
Yeah, just
comment.
just a little clarity. Like I said, it wouldn't be the stopping of current construction. Anybody who has a permit already, who's been platted and has a permit, would still be allowed to do it. It would just be the ones that haven't gone through that process yet. But at the end of that 3-month period, then we'll pick up right where we left off. Nobody's banned forever. And but even so, like I said, I will say that even in the continuance of, if you want to say the platting of land and, and the purchasing of land and so forth like that, I understand your point. And, but at the same time, like I said, something needs to be done. Because right now, I see, as far as in my opinion, I see an imbalance. As far as responses I've gotten from citizens, they see an imbalance, okay? And I'm saying that in truth. Now, even as you speak about the legality of it, if it is a legal issue, then she'll look into it and she'll let us know. But right now, we can't state this fact that it would be against the law. But if it is, she'll look into it. And she'll let us know if that is the case. But even as I said, though, my main priority basically is this. For us to get back and look at that flume before it's too late, okay, before it's too late, and we don't have the land that we need for the things that we envision as far as our growth for the city. And so like I said, if you don't agree with it, that is completely fine. But as I said before, something needs to be done. Is this a big, bold step? Yes, it is. Yes, it is. It is a big, bold step. And like I said, I'm willing to take that step take even that risk. But all I know is this: Killeen has to develop right. And I would even, you know, because I would have even suggested, you know, getting a committee review, you know, a citizens committee together and looking into it. But either way, it has to be developed correctly. We can't keep going the direction we're going. And even so, looking outside of our ETJ, one question I asked already is, you know, as far as our future land use map, have we actually considered much outside of our ETJ? Have we started going to, you know, people who live out there to inquire of them about future? Because at some point in time in life, Killeen is going to have to annex some land. But have we I mean, you know, it's going to happen in the future somewhere, because as I've been told, we basically pretty much used up what we have so far. I mean, that's what I've been told. Okay, now, so that's what I've been told. But as far as that goes, that is accurate, that we basically are pretty much reaching our limit, or have reached our limit as far as where we're going with our city limits, then we have to start looking into the ETJ as well, as far as looking into how we want to plan that as well. And like I said, I have my own idea of how Killeen should look later on, but the simple point is this: if you don't want to take this route, then we must go back to the flume and look at it and work on it hard, and not take our time, not try to kick it back to the burners or anything like that. We need to take care of this thing immediately and make that thing stick.
Can I make a suggestion? Because I think you got two things there, and I agree with you on the flume, and that's a good idea, but I think that the issue here is stop. That's kind of, to me, that's ridiculous. There's so much data, and my recommendation to you would be,
I can reword it if you want me to.
Go out there and look at that. I can give you tons of data and how that really works, because a lot of times what you say is true. You know, you hear from somebody saying this and that, but there's a lot of professionals out there that use true data. We don't get our data just by pulling it out in the air and saying this is a reality, because that's where you make mistakes.
Oh, yes,
and
sir.
There is so much information right now that there is a shortage. And what would happen, it'd be tremendous consequences. Everybody would be called. I'll give them your number when their taxes go up twice and they start paying. But, you know, I think the issue is just temporary. We can talk about the flu, because I think, you know, the future land use map is something that, as a council, we need to kind of update. So I'm with you on that. Okay. But I think that the main thing, I think that the thing says discuss temporary stop. And so what we need to do is just kind of get a consensus. I know Mrs. Fleming wants to talk, so I'm going to let you do it.
Before you did that, right now we have a lawyer sitting right here with us. I think she is knowledgeable in the legality of this. So I would like to hear from Ms. Davis and also our city manager on this, and see if we do have a legitimate case to either move forward or stop it or just leave it alone before we make our consensus.
Sure.
You don't mind,
Mrs.
Ms.
Davis?
Thank you.
It is the right of council to enter into a moratorium. There is a very specific process that has to be followed in the local government code, which Mr. Kilpatrick referred to. It's a requirement that you publish notices in the newspaper, and that you have 2 public hearings, one at the Planning and Zoning Commission and one at the City Council. There needs to be 2 readings of the ordinance at City Council meetings, and then there has to be specific findings. There are basically 3 ways that you can find a moratorium is necessary. One is for public health and safety, one is for lack of public facilities, and then another one has to do with showing that your development ordinances and regulations are not up to par. But you can't just find generally that this is the case. After going through the 2 public hearings, there have to be very specific findings that justify this moratorium. It can't just be, you know, a general statement that we feel that this is necessary or we need to look at it. There have to be very specific factual findings to back up the moratorium. So it's a 2 or 3 week minimum process to get the moratorium enacted with very specific steps that have to be followed. It can be done, it is council's prerogative, but there is a very specific process you have to follow.
If the council says, you know, okay, we want to move forward on this, if we get a consensus, then could you and Mr. Olson sort of guide us through the process if they want to do it?
Sure.
with your,
Yes,
legal expert.
absolutely. We would.
That's a
we
long
would help you with
process
that.
of, it would,
Mr. Harris is very adamant about trying to
Very
find the
adamant not.
information, so, I mean, really, this is what we're here for. If we have an issue and we want to get it out there to the community and it's a concern for him, then we need to do everything we can to get the information. It doesn't matter how long it takes. That's what we're here for as council. So if we get a consensus, one thing. If we don't, then that's another thing, Mr. Mayor.
no, but I think, Mr. Harris, I would recommend that, if you get good information, and like I say, there's a lot of information, and I would recommend, and I'm not going to make a decision here for the council, but then come back and say, I got these facts and I got this information, because I think that's important. Otherwise, we as a council, what you're trying to do is you're putting work on the staff, and we know the staff right now has a lot to do. And so, for something that is just an opinion.
So I was going to say just one more time that, the information I did get, even when I talked about, as far as city limits and how much land we've used.
That's the flume, but I think
Yeah,
that you got
yeah.
a good point there.
No, I'm saying as far as how much of the area inside of our city limits has already been, I guess, built out and so forth. I got that from city staff. So,
Flume, right?
yeah. So it's in regards to that, but like I said, we can go ahead and vote on it. Like I said, I mean, I'm not going to be offended if nobody, if we disagree on this particular thing, but it's just something that was just.
And we can discuss that, because I think
Yeah.
you made a couple of good points there, and we can get back and say, you know what, some of us here on the council can go back and discuss the flume, the future
I'll-
land use map. I think that's one of the issues that we have to discuss.
So I'll submit another agenda item to.
Yeah, but
discuss
right
the
now, we're
flume.
just talking about
Yep.
this item for.
Exactly.
Can we
I'll submit
stop
that.
right now? Can we, next
we-
week,
we're good.
say, okay, we're going to break this down, we're going to stop building for 3 months? Is that going to happen? Mr. Okray?
Yeah, I just go back to last week when we were talking about staffing for planning. It was for the purpose of we were talking about 2 personnel. And they were supposed to carry out some work within planning. Did I hear comp plan? So that's the purpose of them. And so the future land use map and the comp plan, what they're dependent of each other, correct?
Yeah, they are related, and we are proposing an update to the comprehensive plan that they'll work hard on over the next year. The comprehensive, but keep this in mind, the comprehensive plan right now is primarily land use oriented. What we had in mind was to expand the comprehensive plan to include more than land use. So that was our intent with, now that doesn't mean we can't go back and look at land use too. But our intent was to expand the comprehensive plan bigger than land use.
And then there's just another thing, we did talk earlier in the year about this idea of bringing, one of the things that the Planning and Zoning Committee does, which is the approval of, what do you call?
Yeah.
Plats. Yeah, we're going to be doing that too.
Yeah, so that's something that's in there, and with that, I think that would be the appropriate place is through ordinance. Through ordinance, maybe having a discussion
Yeah.
about the intricate details of it. But looking today and receiving the same email that everyone else received, we're looking at $1.2 million in projected revenue for the FY18 budget. And when do we have to approve a budget? That's before 1 October,
September 20th.
September the 20th. How many days is that away? So I'm not willing to jeopardize a balanced budget by potentially subtracting away $1.2 million in the budget, because it's already, it's projected.
All right, so we just need a consensus to either move this item forward or not. Mr. Rivera?
Mr. Mayor, I just want to say this. As everyone is doing their little planning, I've been checking out some things out. I don't want to say what I'm going to say. This is so ridiculous trying to cut those people out? Do you know what we asking for? Do I see any data that support this?
Just say
Are
yes
they
or
just
no.
dreaming, I, and I?
That's
Let's
why
be
we've been
for
brought up
real. We
discussion
have a
to bring the
budget to
data.
take care. No way in how in hell I would even think about this.
All right, so we're just going to start with you. Was that a yes or no?
Oh, no.
Mr. Harris,
I'll say yes.
Mr. Johnson.
Just a comment, I'm fine with this item going on a future agenda to be discussed.
So
But-
yes,
Yes, but
yes.
I'm gonna be clear, I don't have enough information to
I
decide
don't
should we
think
have a moratorium or not. But if a citizen has brought this as a concern to him, he is one of the people's representatives, he should
Yeah.
have the right to put the item on the agenda to be discussed.
And I think there is a lot of information out there, again, Mr. Harris, that we can make and bring it back with more information, because I think that'd be a good way to do it, and not put the staff to discover. A lot of that stuff can be discovered by us initially. Mrs. Fleming?
I don't want to use up our time for the budget. I think if we're going to work on this after the budget time, but I would say yes, after the budget cycle is over with, and we've done the budget and got the,
Okay, well, you can do that, and like I say, with more information, so right now would be yes or no.
yes, after the budget cycle, yes.
Well, we're talking about now.
Yes, yes,
Yes.
yes.
Mr. Kilpatrick?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Under no situation ever
Mr.
am I going to go tell 178 people who make a minimum wage at best, who are carpenters, bricklayers, who are landscape guys, 18 different professions go into building a home. 176 industries go into building a home, starting as much as that doorknob over there. Every garage door in a home. I'm not going to tell 4 people, you're not going to get a paycheck for the next 90 days, and you're living paycheck to paycheck. They're medium income people to low income workers who are out there doing their daily job, doing everything they can to support their families honestly, and say, I'm sorry, we're going to put you out of work for 90 days to 120 days while we think we might want to look at something, because we really don't know it. It's a waste of this council's time and effort. We have much more things to do than try to figure out a way to get people out of work. We need to put people into work. We need to put more jobs, not find a way to take a guy who's got a landscape business, who's trying to make a living day to day, and saying, I'm sorry. And the second thing is, I don't believe it's the city of Killeen's right to tell me as a landowner who has a piece of property 5 months from now that says, I want to build a house on it. No, I'm not going to give you a permit because I'm studying something. Texas law says no. Now,
So I take it
homeowners' rights.
that's a no.
It's a no, sir.
Oh, thank you.
Very
Mr.
emotional
Oakley?
and passionate, no.
No, just for the projected reason that this money is projected in the budget, the revenues are projected in the budget for FY 18, 17, no. It's
No.
in the budget.
All right. So I think we got 3 no's and 3 yeses, so you guys are going to make me earn my $2 a day. And I vote no, so we're going to move on. Back to the budget. Mr. Baldwin. And thank you guys that all were here for this. So.
Thank you, Mayor, Council, City Manager. We're going to go discuss the Drainage Utility Fund. All right, the Drainage Utility Fund is an enterprise fund, and its purpose is to maintain the drainage system for the residents of the city. It is used to account for operations that are financed and operated in a manner similar to a private business, where the intent of the governing body is to capture those costs of providing services to the general public on a continuing basis, be recovered primarily through charges. The next slide shows the drainage fund at 3% relative to the entire enterprise. The following slide goes back to the donut graphs, if you will, And again, historically, you look at 2007 actuals, and then you have a 2017, 2018 comparison. On the far right, I'll focus on that. Specifically, you're looking at total revenues at 4,220,262, and then you're looking at total expenses at 4.970,262. That's a $750,000 difference. What you'll learn later on, that is the difference in the expense side of the house. That's going for the capital improvement program dealing with Rosewood. That's the drainage funds portion of that project. There are several different funding sources, but that's specifically the 750 that's separated here, and those numbers is where that comes from. Next slide. The revenue, it identifies the 4,220,262 that I spoke of earlier, and it shows you the sources of that revenue. The next slide talks about no change in fees, so there's nothing being proposed in this fiscal year budget to date. The next slide deals with user fee rates. Just for information, in residential property, you have different categories: single family, duplex, and multifamily, 3 or more units per unit, and it breaks down the cost of each with a maximum identified at $300. Separate from that $300, you can go down to the non-residential property. It talks about lot and parcel size, and that's where there's a dollar associated with based on the square footage. Next slide is the drain utility fund expense categories. Again, you have the 2007 actual and the 2017, 2018 represented here. The total revenues and expenses, the same numbers and the same separation of 750,000, which I've explained earlier. But the next slide goes in a little bit more detail as far as the expense side of the house, where that $4.9 million is going to. The fund balance, which is the next slide, you'll see that the beginning fund balance for proposed budget is $4.4 million. The revenues is 4.2, and the expenses is 4.9. You'll see a $750,000 negative net change balance, fund balance. So if you took that original number at the top, the 4.479 minus the 750,000, that will give you that bottom right-hand number of 3.729650, which is 103.35% of the fund balance still remaining. The next slide deals with the actual staffing, and there's a 2.72 FTE difference from the proposed budget and the actual estimated actual 2016-17. The next slide goes in a little bit more detail on how that shifts around. You'll see it starting at the drains maintenance, negative 1.81, but then it goes up to 4 in environmental services. And as that flushes out, you'll see a total FTE of 2.72 toward the bottom. The next slide deals with the public works. There is a vacant position that, what's this, changed, I'm sorry, my mistake. It says budgeted through January 31st, 2018. So that has been funded there. If you go to the next slide, it talks about the long-term projections for this particular fund. As you see, the green line is the revenues. The blue line represents the expenses, and the shaded area with these numbers here, population, is what that represents. You see it's tracking pretty well from 2019 through 2027. You'll see a drop. That's where debt comes off from the city, so that will drop our expenses down significantly from the green line, but that represents that debt that's actually paid off. And from there, we can go to city manager comments. I'm not sure if he has anything else to add. Is there any questions that you all have regarding this particular fund?
Mr. Kilpatrick.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In 2036, what event creates us to expenses exceed revenue again?
John, do you have anything added on that? Is that we're just going to issue more debt or what?
I understand that, but it looks like from 2027 to 2036, so we have 9 years of significant surplus. That should, I would thought, would have been, if we're running 103%, and it looks at, right now, where we're balanced, at that point in time, we're probably going to run 130, 140% fund balance each year, increasing with very limited debt. But then the debt or the expenses start showing up significantly there. I just want to know what if there was one significant event which made that occur.
I would imagine that as we approach that population threshold, we have to have conversations along the way about adjust the.
That was unique because I didn't think I saw it in the solid waste or the water sewer at that point too. I didn't see it all of a sudden just spike up. And we would hit that same population.
Yes, sir. This is something that just relates to the drainage.
Okay, good. Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right, anybody else? All right, you're good. Who's next? Are we done with aviation or capital improvements? Which ones?
Capital improvement. Look at that book.
Which one you have, Leslie? Building services, that falls under capital improvements?
Multiple
Multiple
funds?
funds, yeah.
Yes.
We're on the
Be the
third
first
book now,
tab.
yeah.
Okay,
Under multiple funds?
multiple funds. Got it. Look up on the screen.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep, I got it.
Okay, so we're going to talk to you about the building services that has been moved into multiple funds. Used to be in the general fund, but we're moving it into multiple funds because they serve multiple funds. So the mission of building services is to repair, maintain the plumbing, electrical, HVAC systems within the city facilities. Our mission elements are to repair and maintain those life safety components, plumbing systems, electrical systems, HVAC systems. What our metrics look like? We provide routine and emergency maintenance. The square footage that we're providing for is almost 800,000 square feet of major buildings and about 130,000 square feet of minor buildings that are being maintained. The maintenance budget is about $654,000, which comes to about 70 cents per square foot. We're working on 1,200 work order requests. We also maintain elevators throughout the city, 12 of those in city facilities. We also have fire alarms systems and also fire sprinkler systems that have to be inspected and maintained on an annual basis. Our goals for 17 and 18 include the implementation of a HVAC replacement plan with regards to the R22 refrigerant that is being phased out. The EPA is phasing out R22 by the year 2020, so that's going to impact several of our HVAC systems throughout the city. Our goals are also to continue to maintain our city facilities and to respond to work orders in a timely manner to satisfy our end users and to also maintain those elevators, fire alarm systems, and the safety equipment. So how does building services fit into the enterprise with staffing? It's 0.77% FTEs in the fund and 0.55% FTEs throughout the enterprise. Now, how does it fit into the budget? It's 0.98 of the expenses are in the fund and 0.45% of the expenses throughout the city. Our staffing is level. You'll see it's remained with 7 personnel throughout the last 2 years. Our revenue budget looks like this, $807,082. And our expenses are exactly the same. The explanation of how we got there is we're reducing some of the maintenance accounts minimally, but $17,229 reduced in the maintenance account overall, and then $15,816 reduced in the electrical maintenance account, and $15,786 reduced in that HVAC account, and some various other repair accounts and supply accounts. No decision packages were approved by the city manager. One decision package was disapproved by the city manager for $418,000 for that HVAC upgrade, but you will see that it's to be funded out of a capital maintenance program. That's all I have for building services.
City manager comments, any? Nope. Any questions? All right, thank you. It looks like Mrs. Bark is next.
I talk too fast when I drive myself. Okay, I'm going to talk to you guys today about the Human Resource Department. Oh, sorry, that's right. Okay. We're going to be discussing the Human Resource Department. Our mission is pretty simple. We recruit, train, engage, and retain a diverse, valuable, and safe workplace. I can do this without making any mistakes here. Some of our mission elements are basically, they're basically the management of recruiting, testing, we train, we manage the compensation, compensation plan, we manage all of the benefits, we do the recognition programs for employees, employee records, and then again, we also oversee the disciplinary process. By the numbers, I'm going to really focus on just a couple things here, which is just so you can get an idea of how many applications we receive. On average, we receive anywhere from 18,000 to 20,000 applications a year. The turnover rate is another thing I'd like to kind of focus on. The numbers that you see there are from 15-16. And again, the overall turnover rate for all employees is about a 15.62%. The general employees is 21.49%. And then when we get down to civil service, which is fire and police, fire at that time was at 5.65%, and police was at 6.07%. I did do some numbers before I came to this meeting, and as of the end of July, our numbers are a little bit different. If you look at the overall, it's at about a 13%, so it's a little bit less than what we had last year. In the general employees, it's at 16%, and then fire and police are the ones that are doing a different change. They're actually increasing. For fire, it's at about an 8.73%, and for police, it's about a 9.32%. So that's what you'll see the differences in there. I just checked around the school district. Their teacher turnover rate is about a 15.6%, and then their auxiliary group, which is kind of looks a little bit like our employees, theirs is at a 30%. Okay, the other thing, just go to the next slide. Yeah, the numbers. If we manage, obviously, the compensation plan. If we were to bring all of our employees up to the market, that'll cost us a little bit over $5 million to be able to do that. Again, the other thing that we offer is anything to do with benefits, the wellness programs. We do a lot of various things for wellness, from blood drives to wellness walks, physicals for our employees, the wellness assessment, and a lot of fun things that we do for wellness. The next slide will explain a little bit more about the performance appraisals and the recognition programs that we offer to our employees. We also manage employee records, approximately 6,000 employee records that we manage, and then we also manage the disciplinary process, make sure that our employees are following the employment policies. Some of our goals for next year is to implement a fair compensation system. We want to study the self-funding option for health care. We're also looking at our appraisal system for our employees. And then we will focus on the wellness part. We'll focus on smoking cessation and obesity. What we did this last year is we required all of our employees to actually go see their doctor for their physical and have them do the wellness assessment. What we're wanting to do this next year is to educate our employees on smoking cessation for an entire year. And then the next year, it'll probably affect some of their insurance premiums if they continue to smoke. How we fit into the enterprise and into the general fund. We are about 1.33% as far as our staffing for the enterprise, the general fund, I'm sorry. The entire enterprise is at a 0.94%. And how human resource fits in the, as the budget for the enterprise, the general fund, we're about 1.31%. And then with the entire enterprise, we're at 0.60%. As far as our FTEs, this last year we were at 13. We still will be at 13. You'll hear me come back up and speak to you about an internal fund that we're trying to create with risk management. I have one employee that actually does the workman's comps claims, and that employee will actually fall under the risk management. So as far as FTEs, under the HR REM will be all the same. The next slide explains a little bit about our revenue. We're not a revenue fund. We're not a revenue department. But what we do is we support all the departments, and basically you'll see that our proposed budget is about $1 million. Our spending, the biggest expense for HR is our personnel within the department. We also spend, on our contracts, you'll see that it's high as that too, because that handles all of our insurance costs, healthcare, and everything that's under that we fund through our contracts for healthcare. So just wanted to focus on that. Those are the two things that seem to be the most expensive. The explanation of variance, what we've did is we reduced some of the employment physicals and some of the civil service testing, since we may not hire as many this next year. And the advertisement of employment, reduced that. And then service awards may look a little different than we've done in the past, but we're still brainstorming on what that's going to look like. Decision packets that were approved by the city manager were none. And then the decision packets that were just approved by the city manager, I had asked for my funds back. That was denied. A new position for a wellness coordinator. As we move into self-funding, we may have to look at something like that for the future. And then the professional learning development coordinator as well. Those were just approved. The next slide will speak about the compensation plan. Again, right now what we're doing is we're studying. We're looking at a bunch of different ways that maybe we can bring our classifications where they need to be and up to market, and hopefully bring that this decision packet for the next year. And that's all I have. Comments for the city manager.
Questions, Mr. Kilpatrick?
Mr. Mayor, page 31, just a clarification.
Okay.
Under an expense. Expense budget.
Okay. I don't
Near
have
the
my
bottom.
book.
Medical and chemical. What is the expenses in chemical?
Okay. Medical and chemical is what we use to do our drug testing. I know it sounds funny, but that's what we use to do drug testing and our physicals.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right, Ms. Fleming.
Yes, Ms. Burkheim, how you doing?
Good.
I think you're doing a tremendous job.
Thank you.
How often do you all do the drug testing for the employees?
Okay, those are all job specific. Not everyone has to have a drug test. It just depends on their job and what they're doing. So it really just depends on the job and the person. But as soon as they get hired, if it's a requirement of their job, they go through a drug testing.
Okay, then it's like once a year, say if you
No, just once they come on. Yes, ma'am.
don't do it any other time?
We do random drug testing. Yes, if we see that there's reasonable suspicion, then we'll take them immediately.
Mr. Johnson.
I seen an item on your slide that said service awards. What's the process that I can recommend city employees for that award? I want to recommend Roxanne and Lavalis Hamilton over at the community center.
Okay.
Those two fine folks, they helped put together that summer youth program. It was actually free. They applied for and got summer feeding program, breakfast and lunch through August 4th, and actually had 12 community partners come in and put together free classes, martial arts, STEM and STEAM classes, a team modeling camp.
Okay.
It was.
Okay.
So is there
Yes.
a way that I can submit?
Yes, the service awards that HR is responsible is for the longevity of the employees, like we recognize them for their 5 years or 10 years in that. The employee of the month, that is under Hillary's department, and basically we have a nomination form that you just turn in, and then the department heads vote on who they would like to select for that month, and that's how we select them.
Okay. So if I email you, or Sean should give me that form and I can fill it out.
Sure. Is it open for everybody to nominate? I'm not sure how your operation is.
Okay. well, at least Hamilton then. Lavalis needs an award too.
Yeah, yeah, she won the Employee of the Month, right? Mhm.
Yeah. All right. Yeah. All right, anybody else? All right, thank you. Who is next?
Municipal Court.
The court, the judge. You're next. Judge Kimball. Pretty soon we'll have two Kimballs.
Chief Kimball is my identical twin. He just doesn't spell his name the same.
He looks
as I
like
do.
you.
So. All right. Just had this at my spot and then moved it. Okay. Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, City Council, Mr. Olson, Ms. Davis. We operate out of multiple funds, and our mission is very simple. It's to provide citizens with fair and impartial court for the adjudication of all cases brought before the court. We have certain elements, a lot that fall on me and on Judge Simmons, to uphold the integrity and independence of the judiciary, preside over and rule on all cases efficiently, promptly, and fairly, magistrate defendants, set bonds, issue warrants, emergency protective orders, and we have to do that impartially and diligently. And of course, we have to manage the administration of the court, including dockets, records, fine collections, service of warrants, courtroom safety, and provide for juvenile case management. If you look at how we're doing, there have been no valid complaints filed with the Commission on Judicial Conduct, and knock wood, there have actually been no complaints filed in the last 2 years with the Judicial Conduct Commission. I don't think there's ever been one since I've been presiding judge. We dispose of all matters as quickly as possible. We're a little bit behind right now. That's largely due to getting people into court, but we're running pretty good on less than 180 days. Magistrating, defendants, I do a jail magistration every day. This is for the search warrants, 120 this year, and emergency orders 10. If you look at the numbers for violations for last year, you'll see that we're way down in our projected number of violations that are filed. Our dockets are posted every day. We submit all reports. We are subject to audit by the state. We are audited by the state. As far as the numbers on the warrants, we did a warrant audit last year and cleared a lot of old warrants out of the system completely. We do have security breaches from time to time that have to be reported. We had one last year and one this year. We do provide more than quarterly training to staff. We provide training on a regular basis. As far as juvenile case management goes, the formal intake process is improving. We're up to about 85% for this year. The cases are all docketed within 30 days, and our success rate for completion of teen court has gone up. For next year, we're always looking for ways to improve the efficiency of the court in resolving cases and in enforcing compliance. We're working with community organizations willing to supervise juvenile and adult court-ordered community service, doing community outreach to reduce crime, and managing a juvenile docket to provide for positive reinforcement for reformation of delinquency, seeking social services for troubled teens, and provide a teen court with well-trained teen participants. What we cost, we're 1.77% of the total full-time employees in the enterprise and 0.66% of the expenses. The general fund budgets the majority of our positions. We're going to be down to actually 19. I know it says 19.68, but that's because some are continued. through January next year. We pay for the bailiff out of the court security fund and the juvenile case managers out of the juvenile case manager fund. So we're going down from 25 employees this year to 22 for next. We're eliminating a compliance collection manager, a deputy court clerk, and one of our city marshals, deputy city marshals. If you look at our revenue, you can see that it has gone down slightly, and I'll get to a little bit more on that. We do have a balanced budget of $912,831. We do have a decision package that was approved to come from the general fund. I'll talk about that in a minute. For a total budget of $952,783. Fines have decreased slightly, about 7%. However, there was, this is 23% decrease. That's what it was when we did this. It's actually a 34% decrease in the number of violations that have been filed this year. We have a problem coming up with unfunded mandates from the state. Senate Bill 1913 has imposed more restrictive regulations on collection of fines and putting people in jail. We've actually done real well. We were ahead of most courts in following the Office of Court Administration guidelines. We're actually, we found out today we can actually cut out one of the steps that we had done for collection and maybe improve our response time in getting those collections made. If you look at our expense budget, of course, the majority of our operations is in personnel. We have a small materials and supplies account. The contract account is for our software. That's the maintenance account. The total being $912,831, and a decision package raising our expenses up to $952,783. The expense various is unfunding 3 positions. We've reduced travel and training. We've reduced computer equipment and maintenance of receipt printers and cash stores because we can actually buy them cheaper than trying to maintain the ones we have. Now, we do have special revenue funds, the Court Security Fund, the Court Technology Fund, the Juvenile Case Manager Fund, and the Teen Court Fund. All these, the state regulates on what we can spend that money on, and we do spend it appropriately. So the total on that revenue is $235,268, and that is going to be the projected expense as well. Once again, we have the revenue variance I discussed before. I might mention too, we just got notice that the Senate passed a bill concerning mental health of certain defendants that may affect some of our court operations. I don't think it's going to cause too much of a variance in the way that we're handling it now. We do deal with a lot of mentally ill people, and we're pretty good about making sure that they're treated right. Once again, the expense budget balances out with the revenue budget in the specialized funds. We've once again allocated less funds to be spent on training, travel, computer equipment, and technology maintenance. Decision packages, we had reclassification of the clerk of the court to court administrator with a net cost of $39,952, and we did have 3 decision packages which were disapproved concerning the people that we are replacing. Now, let me talk for a second about this change in the court clerk to the court administrator. Killeen is behind the times in its court administration. Most cities have a court administrator who actually does what I'm doing tonight, presenting the budget, managing the personnel, and being the department head. Most judges are not department heads anymore, especially in the larger cities. We have, as a court clerk, Ms. Levada Posey, who is one of only 45 certified court managers in the state of Texas. If you look at the municipal courts in Texas, there's 1,500 municipal courts with probably around 12,000 clerks. So 45 of them are certified court managers. Mrs. Posey is a certified court manager. I know I often joke with people, but it's true. She's my boss. She keeps me in line. She keeps me from making big mistakes. She makes sure that the department runs every day, and it's time to hand that over to her. Judges make pretty bad bosses, to be honest with you. Lawyers are horrible financial managers. If you look at any large firm, they have an office manager who's a non-lawyer, usually an expert in finance, handling the day-to-day operations. Even the managing partners don't get involved in the minutia. They just watch and see how their lawyers are doing with the law. This change just brings Killeen into the 21st century. It's something that should have been done a long time ago. There is always a tension with a judge having to perform duties like budgeting and how that can possibly interfere with a judge's duties to impartially and fairly adjudicate cases. As far as practical changes go, you're not going to see a lot of change. It's going to be an additional burden on the city manager because right now, even though he has control over the administrative side of the house, I'm the department manager, or department head, so he's got trouble in making sure that the city is protected as much as I protect the court. So it's a smart move, and like I said, it's one that's really overdue. We don't have to change the ordinances, anything like that. Our ordinance already provide for a court administrator, and we haven't had anyone designated as that in the history of the court as far as I know. But that's the way the ordinance reads, and that's the way we're going to reclassify Mrs. Posey's position and make her the department head. And that's all I have. We have to answer any questions you have.
I think that's, I support that move. The only thing is that I guess we're going to have to spend more time in your courtroom as council members, because when we evaluate you, we're never going to see you. And it's like, we got to go over there and see what he's doing,
Well, I hate to say it, but you're probably going to see me as much. Anyone who knows me knows I cannot keep my mouth shut. And I do like to make sure council knows what I'm doing, not only what the court's doing, but what I'm doing. I have a really public job, and you can anytime come on over. I have an open door policy. Come in and talk to me anytime you have a concern about anything, and we're happy to take care of you any way we can. I don't know, but I think that right now the Killeen Municipal Court has the fastest trial docket in the state of Texas for municipal court. If you want a trial, you're going to have it 30 to 45 days from your arraignment, which is kind of unheard of. Everything I do, though, is done with the support of the police department and the city attorney's office, and of course code enforcement and anyone who files with me. We have a fantastic working relationship. We try and lessen the impact on overtime for the police. The city attorney, deputy city attorney, who is my prosecutor, is Marty Samuel, and she is a go-getter, and we have streamlined the court so much that there's not a lot of wiggle room for anyone anymore, but we're trying to streamline it even more to make sure that people get their fair day in court.
Yeah. Well, great job. Any questions for Judge?
Okay.
Well, you're
Thank you
good.
much.
Thank you. All right. Looks like Mr. Locke, right? You like being there. You spend I think you're the #1 guy that spends time there.
I miss it when I'm away.
I'm going to give you that as a gift.
This presentation is over the non-departmental accounts. Non-departmentals are used to account for expenses that aren't attributable to a specific department. And so we'll go through the non-departmentals that are present in all the operating funds. Non-departmentals make up about 18% of the city's budget. Starting with the general fund, generally non-departmentals bring in little or no. revenue. In this case, there is a reimbursement that we receive of $500, so there's a little bit of revenue in there. The rest of the funding comes from the general fund. The expense slide details all of the expenses that are categorized as a non-departmental. On the left-hand side, you'll see a description of the type of the expense, and you'll see the same format with the 15-16 activity, the adopted 17 budget, estimated 17 activity, and what is proposed for FY18. The new items that you see in the budget are the transfer for the fleet equipment that the general fund will purchase, the transfer to the general fund capital improvement plan fund, and then the general funds portion of information technology, risk management, and fleet services. So those items are new. And also, as Mr. Olson covered in the previous briefing, we did add separation pay for when an employee leaves. There's $300,000 budgeted for general fund employees as separation pay. Just as an explanation as some of the variances that are on the previous slide, the Bell County Communications Center, on the previous slide, it increased approximately $400,000 to $500,000. This was due to the termination of the red light photo enforcement agreement that we had. Part of that expense was covered in that fund, so now that moved over to the general fund. The tax appraisal district was moved out of the finance budget and put into a non-departmental account where it is where it really belongs. Again, we touched on the separation pay for the general fund employees. We also moved some consulting services that were in the city manager's budget into the non-departmental to be used. And then there's the transfers for the capital improvement program and internal service fund. Moving on to the water and sewer fund, the total non-departmental amount is $8.9 million, and that'll all come from the water and sewer revenues. On the expense side, the biggest non-departmentals that the enterprise funds have are the franchise fees and the indirect cost allocation. Franchise fees are 9% of the operating revenues. It's a fee that the enterprise funds pay to the general fund for use of right-of-way. And the indirect cost allocation are those shared costs that are paid by the general fund and allocated to the enterprise funds for their use of the finance and legal and services like that. You'll also notice in here is the KEDC and chamber contribution. The water and sewer fund pays half of the contribution. The general fund pays the other. Explaining some of the variances. There was an increase in franchise fees. This is due to the water and sewer revenue projected to increase slightly. There was a decrease in the overall indirect cost allocation charged to the water and sewer fund. There was also separation pay added for the water and sewer fund employees as well. And there are the same transfers to the internal service funds that we spoke of with the The solid waste budget is $5.4 million, and it'll all be covered from solid waste revenues. Much like the water and sewer fund with the solid waste, the biggest expenses are the franchise fees and the indirect cost allocation. There's also the transfer to the fleet equipment replacement, and the $1.5 million represents the value of vehicles that the solid waste fund will replace during FY18. The franchise fees increase, and there was a decrease in the indirect cost allocation. The separation pay was added, and there were transfers for the internal service fund and other funds. Non-departmentals in the drainage fund make up $1.6 million. You can see there's a jump from the prior year to the 17-18, and we'll cover the reason for that on the next slide. In a previous brief presentation, I'm sorry, Mr. Baldwin. I could only think of his first name, and I was sitting here trying to think of Dennis's last name. Mr. Baldwin shared that the drainage fund was going to make a $750,000 contribution towards the Rosewood project. And that is the portion of the Rosewood that's related to drainage. So that's the explanation for the big jump you see from last year to this year. There's also a decrease in indirect cost allocation. The drainage fund does not pay a franchise fee as the other enterprise funds do. And again, as with the other funds, there was separation pay added, and there's transfers for the capital improvement program and the internal service fund. Moving to aviation, the total non-departmental budget is $225,000. And the aviation fund doesn't pay an indirect cost or a franchise fee. So their transfer is for the support that they receive from information technology, as well as for their portion of risk management. Explaining some of the variance in aviation, the separation pay was also added to aviation, and there was an increase in liability insurance premiums, and they also have the transfers to the internal service. Skylark's non-departmentals is $16,500. Most of that is their portion of risk management. And the increase in liability insurance premiums is reflective in their transfer to risk management. That represents the amount that they contribute to risk management. The last fund is the hotel occupancy tax fund. That's non-departmentals. It's $280,000. The biggest part of the non-departmental is the Arts Commission grants, and these are the grants to the arts that the Arts Commission brings to City Council for approval annually. The total amount proposed is the same as FY17, $187,737. And the differences for the hotel occupancy tax fund are similar to the others, and that separation pay was added. There was an overall increase in liability insurance premiums and the transfers for the internal service. There were no decision packages approved by the city manager. There was one disapproved, and that was a decision package to consider increasing the KDC and Chamber's contribution back to the original levels that it was at prior to it being reduced.
All right, any city manager comments? None. Any questions? Mr. Harris?
With the, on the explanation of expenses with that, with the increase in liability insurance premiums, you said due to higher losses, what kind of losses have we been having that have caused the insurance premiums to rise?
It is due to higher losses. And I know that there is a risk management presentation coming up a little bit later that I don't know if it's Ms. Park or Ms. Park will be giving. Do you want to cover that right now? The reason for the increase in premiums is due recent accidents and that we're experiencing? Is there anything that elaborate?
Well, yeah, I asked why it went up, yes. Okay. Gotcha. Okay, thank you, ma'am.
Mr. Kilpatrick.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On page 65, did we take a double whammy? We lost the revenue from the red light taxes, or red light enforcement cameras, which was paying a portion of, or the Bell County Communications Center. Since we lost the revenue, we can't pay that, so then we took a double whammy because we had to still pay that, and so we took it out of the general fund to pay that. So that just doubled our losses for losing the cameras.
Yes, that expense had to be picked up by the general fund. That is the only other fund that could cover.
Thank you.
All right. Anybody else? All right. Next, the other Mr. Olson.
So while Tom's getting this pulled up, I'll go ahead and say now I have a total of 6 presentations to go through here. I'm going to run with the assumption that if you're not stopping me and asking questions, that you don't have a question. So please feel free at any time to interject.
Are we okay, council, to go through this, or do you guys need a break or anything? Okay, I think they kind of want a break here since you got 6. So let's take a 10-minute break. All right, I think we got most of the council back. So Mr. Olson, you're back on.
All right, thank you, Mayor. And I do have to apologize. I said 6 presentations, but I actually only have 4 because I've already done 2.
Oh, well, good.
Okay.
We didn't even need to take a break.
So our first presentation we're going to go through here is Public Works Administration. This is the group that manages Public Works as a whole. So what you see here is a mission statement for the Public Works Department, and that's to provide the citizens of Killeen with superior utility services, quality infrastructure, and orderly standards of development to protect their health, safety, and welfare. Now, all that said, to this group of Public Works, we provide divisional oversight for the 5 different divisions that are located within Public Works to plan, evaluate, and execute what needs to be done on a daily basis. Looking at the numbers, when we look at the total number of authorizations for Public Works employees across the city, there are 308. This past year, we've presented 40 different city council discussion items. We presented 65 different action items that have come before you at workshop and a regular meeting. And we're overseeing 19 bond-related construction contracts. Looking forward to next year, we would like to complete our solid waste improvement plan. This is what we have termed the study regarding outsourcing solid waste. And with that, we're following immediately behind it for all of our divisions to go through their own improvement plan in environmental services, streets, engineering, water, and sewer, using that same model as a guideline. We plan to complete our impact fee studies and have that available for council adoption as desired, and continue the implementation of all the master plans across Public Works. And this last item we are actually expanding upon, and we initially set a capital improvement plan for Public Works. We're expanding that to a citywide capital improvement plan for the end of the fiscal year. The admin portion of Public Works is 3 employees. That represents 0.23% of the employees in the city and 0.16% of the expenses within the city. As you look at this, each employee spread across multiple funds here. We show that we added 1 additional employee this year. What really happened there is we reclassified the Director of Solid Waste Services into an Assistant Director of Public Works. And that individual still manages the solid waste division, but they also have a little bit of general oversight within the operations of the other divisions as well. So you'll see the solid waste fund went down by 1, this increased by 1. We have no revenue per se aside from what's appropriated by the various funds. From an expense perspective, we have a heavy personnel services, and we do have a few contracts that are managed within this administration division as well. What you see there, the bulk of the increase from the past couple of fiscal years is a result of adding that AD of Public Works in. Again, the funding overall hasn't changed, it's just decreased within solid waste and moved to Public Works. There were no decision packages submitted, so there were none approved and none denied by the city manager. And that's the end of the first presentation.
Comments, questions? All right, you're good. Number 2.
Next, we're going to be moving to environmental services. This is a division that has multiple names. You may hear it. It's AKA Environmental Services, Drainage Maintenance, Mowing. All of those things fall into this same division. Their overall mission is to manage and maintain the stormwater drainage system and its right-of-ways. From a mission element standpoint, they manage the city's stormwater management plan. This is tied to our TCEQ MS4 permit. As well as mow and maintain drainage infrastructure system and public rights-of-way. They implement the city's drainage capital improvement plan and master plan and ensure compliance with the city's drainage design manual standards. A few numbers here. If you look at this, we maintain over 1,300 acres across the city from a drainage maintenance standpoint. Touching on some of this as we go down through here, they perform about 160 stormwater quality tests per year, and what we're looking for there is what types of pollutants may be traveling through the stormwater into our surface water bodies, creeks, rivers, streams, lakes. Moving forward to fiscal year 18, the intent is to comply with all of our mission elements as well as meet the performance indicators that we've identified previously. There is a purchase for a vacuum unit with a trailer that's tied to our MS4 permit that's necessary for this upcoming year. And we plan to update the drainage design manual standards and infrastructure design and development standards. That's our set of construction standards across the board that identify minimum construction standards for public infrastructure. The Environmental Services Group is 4.3% of the enterprise from an FTE standpoint and 1.7% of the enterprise from an expense standpoint. We are holding relatively steady. What you see here is some movement of folks across various funds, but the overall piece there is generally 57 employees holding steady. The revenue you see here is the revenue that's generated by the Drainage Utility Fund. Environmental Services does manage that fund. 4.1 million roughly is what we're looking at this year. And portions of this division are funded through solid waste as well. We've talked about the mowing group previously, and that's where this group is housed, is within Environmental Services. There was one additional decision package that was approved in the amount of $47,000 this year as well. So what we see here is the operation fees revenue increased due to the overall increase in customers that we have across the city. We've talked about this previously. We've seen our customer base grow, so the overall revenue grows just a little bit. And we have some interest income in there that quantifies some of that as well. From an operations standpoint, we have heavy personnel side, materials and supplies. That's going to include some of our maintenance dollars for these channels and drainage ways. And we have some money set aside for contracts. These are going to be professional service agreements for design, And we're also looking to do a study to evaluate our commercial rates along with our residential rates as the year goes on. This is one we've talked about previously at council meetings, that we need to identify and convert some of our commercial customers from a general rate to an overall impervious cover rate. In this year's budget, we've unfunded 4 service workers for mowing positions, and that's how you saw the reduction in expenses related to mowing. Last year we were around 900,000, and this year we're down to 780. And then we've also reduced our professional services and materials and supplies accounts. The decision packages that were approved by the city manager, we've got a couple of pieces of fleet in there. One of those I mentioned previously was tied to our MS4 permit, so that's something that if we want to comply with our MS4 permit with the state, we need to purchase the vacuum unit and trailer. The radio replacement's a key one there that you've heard in the FD side of the house. They talked about converting to this new radio system. What we're doing here is year 1 of a 3-year program and replacing radios at $36,180. This last piece here is funding an IT position for a GIS person to assist with stormwater and drainage issues and help us digitize some of the data that we have out there. We had one decision package that was denied. This is an MS4 uncertified lab. That was tied, as we talked previously, to the water and sewer capital project to remodel the other half of their building, and then this lab would be located in that half of the building. And again, we're looking at placing this in our capital improvement plan so that we can identify a better way to fund it long term.
Comments, questions? All right, Mr. Kilpatrick.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On the expenses, the radio replacement, 103 program, is that broken down in 1/3? So in the 19 and the 20 budget, we'd see about the same amount, 36K?
Yes, to complete the entire program, we'd expect to see the same thing in both 19 and 20.
Thank you.
All right. Moving on, the next one.
All right, the engineering division. This one's going to look a little bit different this year because last year what you saw was a transportation and an engineering division. This year we've merged the two into a single group that's called engineering. The engineering division's mission is to plan and develop the transportation network of the city. They provide construction management and inspection for all public infrastructure projects, as well as review on all of those public projects. That means private development that has public infrastructure is also reviewed here as well. Their mission elements, they have a transportation planning piece, and this is we're managing and maintaining our transportation master plan and thoroughfare plans. We also manage the federal funding that's tied to our K-Tempo grants, our TechStock grants, and federal highways grants. We have a CIP project management team. This group manages all public works projects that are our CIP projects. They provide inspection for those projects as well as managing the contractors to ensure that they're completing things in a timely manner and doing it the correct way. This group also provides plan review and construction inspection for all subdivision improvements, capital improvements, commercial construction plans, and make sure that the specifications necessary are in those plans, that we get a good product at the end of the day that complies with the standards we've set as a city. Plan review is the front end, and the construction inspection is the back end, where as they're building it, we have an inspector that looks at every aspect of the plans and makes sure they're in compliance. Touching on a few key numbers here, the top one's one that I'm proud of. That's looking at fiscal year 17. We've secured just under $1.4 million in federal dollars to go towards our local capital improvement projects here. That's for 3 separate projects, one at 195 and Stan Schluter, one at Clear Creek for a turnaround bridge there, and one that's another trail extension on the south side of town. The project management team has managed six projects currently. These are major projects, and they've done 2 within each of our groups across Public Works. We've reviewed approximately 79 sets of plans. That includes our commercial and subdivision improvement plans, and performed over 1,400 inspections associated with those plans. Goals for fiscal 18. We want to get back on schedule with our plan reviews and make sure that we're doing these in a timely manner. So we're pushing to perform all plan reviews within scheduled timelines. We'd also like to enhance and improve our IDDSM. Again, that's the standards that are set for anyone who's building in Killeen. That's the level to which they must construct those improvements. We plan to begin construction on a few capital improvement projects. I won't read those to you, but we have a list there of several that plan to kick off over the next year. And we plan to complete the construction on Tremere Road widening and South Nolan Creek bank stabilization projects over that same course.
Yes.
And that will make several folks happy, I'm sure. We're approximately 1.25% of the FTEs within the city, and about 0.82% of the expenses across the enterprise. Looking at staffing, it's going to look a little bit different than it has in years past, because we're taking, again, the transportation and the engineering, historically combining them into one. That's 16 total employees, which is an overall reduction of 1.8 FTEs. There are no operational fees or grant revenues that are considered here. I did say we've got grants that are part of our TechStop programs, but that all balances out in the CIP budget. This group was appropriated $1.4 million for the year. What we see here is, like the other divisions we've seen, heavy in personnel. We do have a high number in contracts here, but this is what houses several of our master planning initiatives. It houses any testing that's necessary to be done outside of the city. These are soil samples that are necessary for construction projects. There are various engineering studies that must be done to ensure we're complying with standards. One thing that you see here, there was a couple of movements that were made. We removed streetlight electricity services out of what was last year's transportation group and into the street operations fund. And you see no capital outlay here in FY 2018. There's typically been a larger portion of professional services that are held here, and we're reducing those professional services this year. There were no decision packages approved and none declined either. That's the end of the engineering group.
Questions, comments? Mr. Johnson?
I have a question. I just seen, there was a slide, you were talking about street lights. I was looking at a lot of these street lights, and they, is there a way, how can I say it? There were some volunteers that were open to helping to paint some of the street lights to improve the aesthetics of it. Is there a way to be able to have it done without, to try to get around the liability?
We have worked in the past with some programs like that. There were some in downtown a couple of years ago, so it can be done. But we need to look at the specifics to make sure it's done correctly.
All right. Next, I think you got one more, right?
Yes, sir. Our last Public Works presentation for the night is the Street Operations Division. We took what was historically streets and traffic and coined that into a single term this year as street operations. So this division's key component here is to maintain the existing transportation network. And transportation network is the word to use here, because we're not just talking about streets. We're talking streets, sidewalks, certain drive approaches that are considered public approaches, trails, curb and gutters, valley gutters, those types of things that are within our public right-of-way. This group also provides a key component in street sweeping to help us comply with our MS4 permit. And they maintain and install all traffic control devices. which are traffic signals, signs, those types of things. Pavement markings are a portion of that as well. And we also provide emergency response for any issues related to streets that need to be closed, traffic signals that are experiencing outages, those types of things. As we move into the mission elements, the key one here, we're maintaining our street system. With that too, though, you move into concrete infrastructure, and this is the sidewalks, trails, et cetera, that we mentioned before. We have street sweeping, traffic control devices, pavement markings, signalized intersections, school signal flashers, and an emergency response piece.
Question.
Mr. Rivera.
So I got a question pertaining to the 65 school flasher that we got out there in the street. I thought that was handled by the KISD.
No, that's handled by our street operations division. We do receive funding through the Bell County Child Safety Escrow Fund. So a portion of KISD's taxes come to us to help offset that cost.
To do that? Okay. Question answered. Thank you.
Mr. Gilpatrick.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Same slide. Maintain concrete infrastructure, sidewalks. During this last election, I know several of us walked a lot, and we couldn't walk on a lot of the sidewalks. Matter of fact, I know in northern part, but also in Pershing Park and in the what I call the flower streets, Daffodil, Bluebonnet, that area, Botanical. There's sidewalks that don't meet ADA anymore. They've collapsed and they're dropped. There's no way you can put a mechanized chair into them. They're taking the street routes. How much of, we got, like, I know it's like streets too, but
Right.
how much money do we need to go in and repair? Or has there been an assessment?
We haven't done an assessment for an ADA transition plan. It's something that we know will need to be done in the future. And the brief talk we'll have there, when we get into the numbers, you'll see the budget for street maintenance, the budget for this division is very thin. As a matter of fact, it's way too thin. And when we try to prioritize things, we address those that are safety issues as our first priority, and then we try to address those that are big ticket items as priority number 2. So we've been doing a balancing act for years, and we have a lot of concrete infrastructure that's in dire need of some attention.
Go ahead. No, go ahead. No, I didn't know. Mr. Kilpatrick, you finished, right?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
All right, go ahead.
Madam Councilwoman, go for it.
Thank you. I want to ask just one question. The 163, is that number for the whole community, or is that just one part of Killeen, the work order pavement marking? Is that just for the whole entire community, sir?
Pavement markings is for the entire community. The work orders you see here, what we're looking at pavement markings, this is primarily crosswalks and just a very small portion of the town. We historically have not had a comprehensive pavement marking program. And you can see that driving down Elms Road near Clear Creek. You can see it driving down W.S. Young by the mall. We're in need of addressing pavement markings, and we're planning to do that in this next year a little better than we have in the past.
Because there's like a need assessment in each area, because in my area, Saturday, I was walking, I almost fell over on the sidewalk, over there on Hill Street. If you kind of go over there and you riding around 1707 Hill, that sidewalk is about to cave in, and the pastor lives in that house. He said he was going to send me an email on this, so that's another subject for another time. But
I'm watching Mr. Coaster back here. He's jotting down that address as you speak, so I'm sure he'll check into it first thing in the morning.
It's a real bad sidewalk area there, sir. So, David, you can kind of check that out when you go over that area. Thank you, sir.
So touching on a few of these numbers as we run through here.
I had a question.
Go ahead.
So, I'm just curious in Killeen if we have an ordinance that makes the repair of the sidewalk the city responsibility or the adjacent property owner. Anybody know the answer to that?
Typically, what we've seen, I don't know that we have an ordinance that addresses it, but historically what's happened is if it's a residential property and it's in the public right-of-way, then we as a city are addressing it. There are occasions where if it's next to a commercial property, the commercial establishment may address it before we get there just because they feel the need that it needs to be addressed.
Well, I will tell the council, in I think every city I have worked in, there's a city ordinance that makes the repair of the sidewalk the adjacent landowner's responsibility, and that might be something that we want to look at.
Mr. Okry.
I think, is it even with the water, like a water line, it breaks on the property side of the property, and then it's the property owner's responsibility to fix it.
From the meter to the house.
From the meter to the house. But that meter is, you have the meter or the right of way for that, then you have the sidewalk.
Yeah.
So I don't even know, maybe I don't know, even building houses, is the cost for building the sidewalk included in that construction or house, commercial property?
Yeah, they have to build, I know that our ordinance says, right, when they build, they have to put the sidewalk in both residential and commercial.
Yes.
So they're responsible for that.
They're responsible for the initial installation. Typically, it's dedicated to us as the owner after that if it's within a public right-of-way. But that is definitely something we need to have discussions about as we move forward.
Okay.
The one thing...
Mr. Harris?
I was going to say, if the sidewalk were to become the resident's responsibility or the adjacent landowner's responsibility, I mean, the first thought that came to my mind, can we still fine them if their vehicles are out past the sidewalk, if it's their responsibility? I mean, just overall, I mean, because it's almost like it's theirs now. So would that still be fair to fine them code enforcement wise if it becomes theirs?
I think we're diving off into a subject that can go on for a good amount of time.
Yeah.
There are definitely positives and there are definitely negatives to that avenue, and perhaps it's better addressed later.
Mr. Rivera?
Mr. Mayor, I would like to get back to the budget issue.
Okay.
I think this is something that needs to come in a workshop. Very important.
Yeah, I think we're all in agreement in that. So continue on, Mr. Olson.
The one thing I want to touch on our number slide here is our lane miles of highway. So when you see a lane mile is identified as one lane of roadway, approximately 12 feet wide, and 1 mile long. So if you were to take our lane miles of roadway and stretch them end to end, you could drive 2,191 miles without stopping. You think about that, that's a very moving number, and it's a huge responsibility that we have. Some of our goals as we move to fiscal year 18, we're going to continue to apply the surface treatments that we have based on the approved funding levels. Again, we're not where we need to be from a funding standpoint, but we're going to do what we can with what we have. Part of our MS4 permit says that we're going to increase the miles of street sweeping to 10,000 curb miles this year. I mentioned before we're implementing a new pavement marking program. This is something we historically haven't done, and that's going to be based on funding that is available. We've got some standard specifications and details that we're looking to adopt for our traffic signals to ensure that if a large commercial establishment comes in and they have to install a traffic signal, that they're installing it the same way we would if we were doing it ourselves. Our signalized intersections should increase from 97 to 104 over the course of the year. We're going to upgrade 10 of those for communications back to our traffic management center. And currently we have 70 of the 97 that can communicate back to that traffic management center. And then the last piece here is to implement a maintenance contract for our traffic management center to allow proper support and upkeep of that center. Looking at streets in compared to the enterprise, we're 4.37% of the FTEs and 2.64% of the expenses within the enterprise. What you see this year is an increase of 2 FTEs in streets, and this is another one of those that it's not 2 new employees. We took 2 employees out of the drainage maintenance group and move them into streets. These are folks that are going to help with street sweeping to make sure we hit that 10,000 curb miles benchmark that we need to. From a revenue standpoint, what we see here is we've got a little bit of revenue in the child safety fees that come in. That's the KISD portion. We use that money for various capital projects. This year we installed a trail system at Brookhaven and Rancier schools. And moving next year, we'll have start for design for another project, as well as some pavement marking for crosswalks, some signage, and school flashers, those types of things. Looking at red light enforcement, you'll see a drop there. Previously, traffic signal maintenance, some of the pavement markings and some of the other maintenance issues were funded from that red light program. So we've got $184,000 that we're going to need to make up out of the general fund again in this piece of the budget. Moving to the expense budget, you can see this one's a little more drawn out, a little more detailed than some of our others. Again, we're relatively heavy on personnel. One of the big ticket items you see as you move down through here, though, is street light electricity. That is the fee that we pay to Encore every month to keep the street lights turned on. You see also funding there for traffic signals and maintenance. A lot of this stuff is detail that previously was 2 divisions, and now it's put into a single division. Again, we mentioned the 2 key factors there was the loss of the red light enforcement program and the street lights that have been moved from previously transportation now to street operations.
Excuse me, Mr. Mayor. Did I hear you say that we pay every month $750,000?
We don't pay every month. That's for the year. We pay a monthly fee to them that totals $750,000 for the year.
Thank you.
All right.
There were no decision packages approved. We did have 2 that were denied. These were both requests for an increase to the available funding for 2 programs. The first one being the street maintenance. We've talked about this several times. We had a significant amount of deferred maintenance. We're not addressing that with this budget. As a matter of fact, we're funding it to a lower extent this year than we have in several years. We had requested an additional $1.45 million to bring us to the $1.75 million total. That part was denied, and then we requested an additional $107,000 to apply to pavement markings to get onto an annual maintenance program to make sure that we have good pavement markings to clearly delineate lanes across the city. And I know Mr. Olson has some comments to go through here, so
Mr. Olson.
with that.
I had to disapprove the $1.4 million request for additional funding for street maintenance. Not because I enjoyed it or I wanted to, but we simply didn't have the money. And I do want to remind the council that I think we've talked about this previously, but about 5 years ago we had a study done that said we had, I think it was $17 million of deferred maintenance. We were spending $750,000 a year in maintenance, and we needed to be spending just short of $2 million. And that if we didn't do that, within 5 years, our deferred maintenance would go from 17 to 42 million, give or take a little bit. Well, we haven't done anything with it, and that deferred maintenance number has increased. I am very concerned about this particular issue. I think that we're not going to resolve it with this budget, but I would like to ask the council to set aside a work session where we can come in and have some detailed discussion about the condition of our roads and about funding options for being able to take care of that important responsibility. And I think it's a high priority. I think it's something after we get through the budget that we ought to put on our discussion agenda and work with the council through the issue.
Yeah, I think one of the things that they mentioned, because I think we hired a company to do that evaluation, and I remember the rating, it was a rating of 1 to 100, and they said that if you're at a 70 or below, that's critical. And I don't know what I think it was like a 78 or an 82 or something.
We were right around 80 at that time.
Yeah, so we're getting
So
close to
we're-
that 70, and the further we get, and that's the big can that I always mention that we keep kicking down the road, because it's going to cost us quite a bit of money. So I think that that's a good idea. You know, we need to come up with a workshop and figure out how we're going to pay for this. So.
One other thing to touch on here, it's a kind of a staggering number, puts it in perspective. You rewind to 1996, the street maintenance budget for street maintenance. So that's the dollar amount we're spending on maintaining our streets was $600,000. Fast forward to next fiscal year, we're proposing to spend right around $300,000 in 2018. We stayed right at that $600,000 mark, relatively level. It's dropped down to $400,000 and $500,000 a few years, and it's gone up to almost $1 million a couple of years in there. But generally, we're way down the line there, and we're funding it half of what we did at that time.
I have a question on that.
Mr. Harris.
So from the funding of, like you said, between 1996 and today, like for the 600 and, you know, when it was 400 or 500, were there any, I guess, any bonds that were taken out to help keep that number a little bit higher, or was that just the natural revenue, the natural amount that was allowed because of the revenue that came in?
That was the amount that was spent from year to year. Now, there were a couple of projects along the way that were capital maintenance projects that were funded through bond issuance, but this is your day-to-day pothole repairs, your overlays for streets, your crack sealing, standard maintenance.
Okay.
And that's just what's been available from year to year. It's fluctuated.
All right, thank you, sir.
Mr. Okry.
When a new road is built, it's, what is it, how many years after that building, we start talking about maintaining that road? And that's something that, you build it, built to a standard. And after that, you have to pick up the maintenance for it.
Right. And that's kind of a multi-answered question. So I guess what we'll do, I'll say, if you were to build a road today and do nothing to it for the next 20 years, it would probably be okay. At some point, 20 years, you might make it to 30, but at some point in there, it would fall apart. And it would hit that curve that we've been talking about where you drop off the cliff. Now, what we try to do is do our preventative maintenance at 5 to 7 years out. And if we can establish that preventative maintenance schedule, what it does is it prolongs that flat degradation period so that we're not ever approaching that catastrophic failure point. We stay on a nice even keel and can maintain what we have.
Because I know it was a lot said about it, but with the maintenance of a major, or the Stan Sluter, looked fine to me. But somebody decided the maintenance was to, pull that stuff off, put it back down. I thought they were done then.
Right.
And they did some more to it, so that's part of the
And
maintenance.
that's a great example, actually. I'm glad you brought that up, because what you said there, it looked just fine, right? But what you don't see is they've got some cracking that's occurring. You don't see it when you're driving 55 down the roadway, but you've got some cracking that's starting to occur. You've got some degradation in the oil and the emulsion in the asphalt that starts to make it degrade. So if you let that go, the asphalt dries out, and when it falls apart, it falls flat apart. And then you have to dig not only the asphalt, but you have to dig down through the base, rebuild the base section, and rebuild the entire roadway. What they did was a preventative maintenance measure that was a coating, similar to if we do a slurry seal here. And that extends the life of that asphalt. It adds oils back to it. It makes it bind well so it doesn't fall apart. And that's exactly what they were doing there.
Mr. Herrera.
I'm glad you brought all this up, and I think we need a workshop for this, because I don't want to go back what we did 12 years ago, where we put gravel all around the city with little rocks flying everywhere. So, and I still got them in front of my house. So we need to do a workshop on this as soon as we can.
Yeah.
I'll just say one thing.
Mr. Harris.
I'll just say this. You don't have to answer right now, but I just throw out a suggestion. I mean, when we get roads and stuff dedicated to us? I mean, maybe we
Rosewood?
should, the city, when the city gets like, roads dedicated to us or, are given to us, I mean, maybe we should hold off on those for a little while until we get a hold of what we do have, but that's just a suggestion.
All right.
All right, thank you.
All right. Who is next? Mr. Locke. Yeah, we're going to put one of those in your living room.
This is the first internal service fund that we'll be discussing with you. This is the fleet fund. It's the mission of the fleet fund is to procure vehicles and equipment, manage and maintain fleet assets, and provide fueling operations. The mission elements are to procure and dispose of vehicles and equipment, manage and maintain the fleet, and fuel the fleet. Looking at the numbers, there were a total of 4 pieces of equipment purchased, 56 that were purchased that were carried over from FY16, and 19 pieces of equipment auctioned. The fleet completed 9,100 internal work orders and subletted 1,700 work orders. The city consumed or purchased almost 387,000 gallons of unleaded fuel and almost 380,000 gallons of diesel fuel. I'm sorry. The goals for fleet next fiscal year is to timely procure the FY18 vehicles and equipment that will be purchased. We're looking forward to reestablishing staff training opportunities, continue to refine preventive maintenance schedules, and convert existing equipment codes to industry standards, monitor and reduce repair comebacks. When they fix it, they want it to be fixed the first time. Reduction in tire damage by maintaining proper inflation and cleanliness of unloading area. Going to rebid the oil and tire services contracts and implement GPS telematics program, which will cut down on the fuel used by the city. Fleet makes up 100% of the FTEs in the fleet fund, 2% enterprise-wide. Fleet's budget's 100% of the fleet fund and 3.3% enterprise-wide. Fleet has a total of 26 FTEs, and that holds steady. There's 2 different sides of fleet we're going to look at. One is the operations side, which is the expense for the technicians that maintain the fleet. And then there's the capital side, which are the expenses related to purchasing fleet. First, looking at the revenue budget for operations, there'll be a total of $1.4 million that will be paid into the fleet fund from the funds that you see listed. So where you see the name of the fund for the proposed budget, that's the amount that fund will contribute towards fleet services in FY18. Most of fleet's expenses are personnel related. And as you see, the expense budget matches the revenue budget. Explaining some of the variances you see on the expense budget. The uniforms and clothing increased to meet some safety requirements. There was some commuter maintenance renewals that increased. And we touched on a little bit earlier that the training and travel was going to be reinstated for fleet in FY18, so the training and travel budget increased. Moving on to the capital side, for the revenue budget, you'll see the list of the funds, and for the FY18 proposed budget, the amount that fund is contributing. That represents the value of the vehicles that will be purchased for that particular fund. So for the general fund, there will be almost $2.4 million of vehicles purchased for the general fund, a total of $4.5 million. On the expense side, it looks generally the same. It just shows where those vehicles are going to be purchased and for what fund. There were no decision packages approved by the city manager. There were two decision packages disapproved, one request for a position and one for replacement of a vehicle that fleet retains in-house. The next couple slides just gives you some insight into the current fleet that the city has. Actually, from page 159 through 162, it lists each piece of equipment that is being proposed to be purchased during FY18, and it's a summary by fund. So if you go to page 160, you'll see the total of the general fund is the $2.4 million that we touched on earlier. If you go to page 163, this shows the units that are out of life cycle. There was a study conducted in 2016, and at the end of 2016, approximately 49% of the city's vehicles were out of life, past the stage where we should have replaced them. And there's some scenarios that the study put together on different approaches of how we can get those vehicles replaced and get caught back up. This year we're replacing $4.5 million of vehicles, so we're certainly making some strides towards that. This slide shows a comparison. It compares, the green bars represent different companies, different cities that were looked at, and the yellow bar is the city of Killeen. So it shows that the average vehicle age when the study was completed for the city of Killeen was almost 9 years, and the industry average was about 7 years. So on average, we hold on to vehicles 2 years longer. The next slide is just more life cycle analysis. It shows that if we did nothing, what percent of vehicles would be out of life cycle as the years progress. Of course, we are addressing the problem. We're replacing $4.5 million of vehicles in FY18. So, but this was just a slide that was, or a part of the study put together showing if it's not addressed, how it can get out of control. The aging table actually lists each class on the left-hand side, each class of vehicle that the city has, and across the top, it has the list of years from 0 to greater than 15. And it shows how many vehicles the city owns in each one of the age groups. The highlighted figure is the recommended replacement schedule that the city was using as of the end of calendar year 16. When the study that was performed gives us a range of years to replace vehicles, and we've really moved to the back end of that range on being able to replace the vehicle to get the least cost of ownership. As we start replacing vehicles, we'll be able to move those yellow dots closer to more industry standard averages for replacement. This is just a continuation of that.
Any comments, questions? Mr. Okry.
As I understand it, so well, the typical method of us acquiring vehicles is through the general fund, the solid waste fund, what was it? What slide? It was a slide in here I did see. Oh, general fund. No, wait a minute, that's the wrong one. General fund, solid waste fund, water sewage fund, drainage, utility. That's on slide number 156. Does that cost, so that's the cost for the total, purchase for it? So this is, so we've been doing this way all the time, or when do?
No, sir, this is the first, this is the first time in, well, I can't say in a while, because in FY16, we did create a fleet replacement fund, and we were able to replace some vehicles. For FY17, that was not done, so there were basically no vehicle purchases or little to none made in FY17. And now in FY18, the fleet replacement is being made a priority for each one of the funds. So for our plan is from FY18 forward that these funds will continue to replace vehicles at this level.
So prior to that program, fleet replacement program, how were we? Were we going? We were going to the bond market, were we not?
There was there were many years when fleet wasn't purchased, especially for the general fund. That's why we find ourselves right now with the average vehicle life of 9 years.
Mm-hmm.
So there were many years that that fleet wasn't purchased. As to whether the city has issued bonds for replacement of fleet, I don't recall that we have issued any bonds in at least recent years to replace fleet. I know there was some talk about it a couple of years ago, but I don't believe we have.
So moving forward, this is going to be the method in which we will.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, I think you're good. All right, who is left?
We still have a bunch of them left.
What?
I'm
A
going to offer an
bunch.
incentive for hurrying.
Mr. Moore, IT.
I'll try to hurry through this.
Don't rush time.
Don't rush? Okay, all right. I'll try not to. All right. Mission of the IT department, those operational efficiencies and employee productivity are what we're looking at specifically. If you look at our mission elements, I'll start from big and go to small. Our network is everything from the connection you see on the wall all the way out to the World Wide Web. Our standard software and hardware is what you see on employees' desks. Enterprise applications are similar to what I talked about tonight with Superion. And then GIS services, you all know about that with the maps. By the numbers, just to give you an idea, this is on a 6-month basis for these percentages here on the top. 1 percentage point is equal to 87 hours of downtime in a year. So industry standard is somewhere around 99.999 and 98. For instance, if you've seen the Sprint commercials where they say that they're within 1 percentage point, that's 87 hours of downtime that you don't get to use your Sprint phone. Yeah. Try to keep it up to 99. We've been pretty lucky in the past 6 months. We've just started tracking this as a requirement. The 2% unauthorized software, that's based on some of the systems that we have are still using older operating systems, and we're trying to move those towards more current operating systems, and we hope to have that down to 1% or less in the next few years. In my application support, those 61 applications that you see, 21 of those are from just Superion. GIS has 1.5 million assets that they track within the city. And they have some websites that they use to depict those. They're up to 8 internal and 9 external web pages, and we're going to move to more. So we look for next year, FY18. We're looking internal. Our first 7 projects that you see there are all internal, trying to get our infrastructure ready for our next phase, and that's to move more mobily and more citizen-centric. The last three that you see there, the Next Gen 911 is very important to us as a city. 78% of 911 calls come in on a phone now. That's very hard to depict if you don't have GPS. So what the Next Gen 911 allows us to do is pinpoint addresses in our database so that we can send out our public safety servants out to an exact point on a map. Executive time is our.
I have a question,
timekeeping
hold on.
system. Yes.
Mr. Johnson.
That GIS interactive webpage,
Yes, sir.
is that going to include making those GIS maps on the city's website mobile friendly?
Yes. That's part of our project is to make those mobile friendly for phones and iPads, so you can see them better on that instead of like the Bellcad one that you've got to really work to get some clarity to.
You know, I was trying to gear voters to the election page that the city sets up, and it has where you can go down at the bottom and put your address in, but most of the citizens were using mobile devices, so.
Yeah, it's hard to do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're moving that way, and hopefully by the end of the year, end of this fiscal year, we'll have all of our external facing ones mobile. And then the last one there is some of our departments have very antiquated and manual processes, and we're trying to automate as many as we can. IT, we take up about 1.87 FTEs, and I'll get to that in just a minute, and then 1.54 of our expenses. Kind of spread out in the way that we were set up. We have most of our folks in the general fund. GIS department was started with water sewer, and they've stayed that way over years, but we're trying to move them into the general fund. We have one person out at Aviation who works 24/7 basically out there. I think Matt, right? No, he's our. Maybe he doesn't work as much as he says he does. All right. But we've got one person out there that's supporting them to keep the airport running at all times. And as you can see, we've dropped one network technician for FY 17-18. As we moved into becoming an internal service fund, we looked at direct and indirect allocations. Now this looks a little different. We're not revenue generator. We get our money from all the funds. What you'll see there at the top is water sewer. The reason why that's higher than the general fund is because of those 5 folks in water sewer. But those are direct and indirect funds that we've looked at across the enterprise to best support what we have and also charge those funds exactly what we need to do in order to operate. We did have a decision package, and I'll get into that, but our final budget this year is $2,780,059. Our expenses, you'll see that our expenses for personnel is 1.4. That's roughly 52%, where you saw other departments were very heavy on the personnel side. We're about 50-50 in our support. The rest of that is all what we use to support, like you saw tonight, Superion, SmartNet, those kinds of things that we support the enterprise with in our funding. And some of those variances this year, we looked at some telephone costs that were paid out of non-departmental, and we moved those into our department so that we can manage those a little bit better. We've cut some of those costs just by looking at what was really needed. So we think we're going to cut more as we go through. Also, we've been really good at our software maintenance. We're pretty well on our computer equipment. I think that we're probably about 95 to 96% everyone that's got a computer that's less than 3 years old. And because we're doing better, we don't need as much consulting services. I'm sorry, I'm behind. All right, decision packages. One of the things that we had asked for is a review of our Microsoft licensing and the way we're doing Microsoft licensing. The city manager has allowed us for $25,000 this year. Hopefully that will cover all of our costs for that. We are looking with Microsoft to push that out to more than a 2 to 3 year cost. So we think $25,000 will cover us for this next year. And also, he was generous enough to give me back a technician. We were trying to do a few things within our budget, so I asked for a raise to the budget cap, and of course he said no. And then the last one there is a software that we found called Track It. It allows us to integrate code enforcement, building inspections, fire inspections, engineering, and a few others. We're trying to get that to automate them and get them more mobile. The price tag was just a little bit too high for this year, but you will see that again, sir.
I hope I can approve it.
Yeah, I hope you can approve it. That's right. I'll be happy to answer any
Comments and questions. Mr. Kilpatrick, you had a comment?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just real quick.
Mm-hmm.
On page 173, number of calls to the help desk. How many people work the help desk? Are they
One.
permanent?
We have one help desk technician. Yes, sir.
Okay. That's 7,210. If you take a 20/80 normal hours in a year, that's 3.5 calls per hour, 8 hours a day for 5 days.
Yes, sir.
And one individual is taking,
Yeah, when she takes her lunch break, someone else chimes in. When she's off, someone
Fills in.
else. Yes,
what are
sir.
most of, if y'all quantify, what are most of the?
Most of those?
Yeah, what are they about?
After a 3-day weekend, password resets. No, I'm just kidding. Different things. They're as simple as a password reset and as difficult as my computer's not coming on at all. And then we'll have to bump it up to a tier 2 technician and send them out to fix it. There's at least 30 different categories that we track right now.
I know that at Fort Hood that we did the same type of study about 8 years ago. And the help desk then went to the departments. And somebody in the department then would say, I'll walk over across the hall and try to do that instead of having,
And we've
found
been
out my computer's not plugged in.
Yeah.
My mouse is unhooked from the CPU. Cleaning team did something better.
right.
Okay.
Yes,
I'll
sir.
just-
Now, we've done some
A lot of
things
work for
like,
one person.
when we look at specific systems like water sewer, we've empowered a person down in the water sewer department to handle those specific, like SCADA, BPAT, FOG, those systems that we don't ever touch. They're not even, they touch our network, but we don't manage them at all. We have someone that does those down at that.
Okay.
We've got a person at the fire department. Obviously, there's 2 folks down at PD that we work with. They're not part of our numbers, but we work with them. But yeah, there are folks throughout the enterprise that do those kinds of things. But for the most part, yes, sir, it comes to our help desk.
Mrs. Fleming.
Tom, I just have one question. Within your structure, do you kind of cross-train your employees to maybe pick up and train and kind of move up the board? Say, if I was doing a particular job and someone, I get tired of doing it, you cross-training other employees to do what I'm doing?
Somewhat, yes, ma'am. But it's kind of compartmentalized because we've got folks that deal with systems, some that deal with computers and printers, and then some that deal with our network. We can't really make one do all because it's just too much for one person to understand.
But like a particular person doing a specific job. Say, for instance, he could have get sick one day. Do you have someone to kind of pick up his job to do that? Say, John Joe couldn't come in this morning and he's doing a specific job. Do you have someone to fill in his position that day?
Most of our folks are 1 deep, but we do have some, like the computer techs, we have 2 now. Network techs, I have 3. But when it gets to network administrator, system administrator, and system admin, no, I've only got one of each of those.
I was just wondering, how you work in your program, structure, if this is in line with, and that's good though, if you're doing that, that's great. Because you have a big system down there, and it's one.
Yes, ma'am.
I wouldn't want it to go down because someone got sick or had a cold.
We try not to.
Thank
Yes,
you,
ma'am.
Tom. You're doing a great job.
Keep it running. All right, anybody else? All right, Mr. Moore, you're done. Mrs. Bark, weren't you up here already? It's like deja vu.
Okay, we're going to talk a little bit here about the risk
Patrick,
management
I'm going to take a
division. And the risk management's mission statement is to minimize the city's financial risk and prevent loss. Thank you. Our mission elements are to implement and manage an effective safety program, implement and manage an effective loss prevention and risk management program. We also want to manage appropriate insurance programs to ensure proper coverage and cost benefits, reduce preventable work-related injuries, and reduce preventable work-related vehicle accidents. By the numbers, we want we implement and manage an effective safety program. What we did is last year when we unfunded the risk management position last year's budget, I took an opportunity, a vacancy that occurred, and I reclassified it to a workman's comp specialist, and that person does all the claims for workman's comp. We implement and manage an effective loss prevention and risk mitigation program. With this division, if it gets added, we anticipate that we could save anywhere from 15 to 35% in our premiums after the next couple years. We also manage appropriate insurance programs to ensure proper coverage and cost benefits. What we did is we completed an RFP last spring to make sure that our insurance provider was somebody that we wanted, and we had been with TML forever, and they still came up on top as well. Want to reduce preventable work-related injuries. What we have done in this past year is we've hosted 8 full days of on-site training and also 9 full days scheduled for FY17. I'm sorry, that was last year. The 8 full days was last year. And then the fiscal year to date, we've had 34 preventable injuries. There you go. That's all right. 34 preventable injuries at a 16%. Reduced preventable work-related vehicle accidents. Hosted last year, what we did is we hosted 8 full days, also on-site training, and we have 9 full days scheduled for this last year. In fiscal year to date, we have 42 preventable vehicle accidents. Our goals for this next year are to implement and standardize the effective safety program. We want to obviously reduce the preventable incidents and incorporate a loss prevention practice and risk management function in areas in addition to employee safety. How do we fit in the organization, both by staffing and budget? It's about it'll have 3 positions or 3 authorizations, so 0.23 FTEs in the enterprise, and then for budget it'd be 0.71 of the budget. And this shows the staffing. So the staffing, what we'll have is, right now we have a workman's comp specialist, so actually what we're doing is just reclassifying that position and then adding the risk manager and the safety officer. And the revenue, the cost the way we make our revenue is the cost that the departments are paying to be covered by their liability insurance. So that's what shows what our revenue will be. And so that shows up to about $1.2 million. And then the expense, obviously our biggest expense right now will be our insurances, basically the cost for the insurances that we have for our city. And then the explanation of variance is that we want to increase the budget target to account for a creation of the risk management division. The decision packet that was approved was one of the ones that the city manager approved was to refund the risk manager position, add a safety officer position, and then reclassify the workman's comp specialist. The workman's comp specialist will actually be a claim specialist, and they'll take over all the claims, not just only workman's comp, but all city claims is what we're looking at there. And the decision packets that were just approved were none. And then there's also one more slide, if you don't mind showing one more slide. This slide here kind of gives you a perspective of where we are. The blue line is the city of Killeen. The red line is industry standards. So if you look at this coming year, anywhere from 16 to 18, looks like we're going to have, because we don't have a good safety program in place, our insurance is going to go up a little bit over $200,000. If we were to have a safety program in place, eventually we will be able to save anywhere from 15 to 30%, and that's where we would want to go. We won't see the savings probably, obviously, in the first year, but more likely we could see it within the next 2 to 3 years, and then the program will automatically pay for itself.
What happened? I was waiting for comments and questions. No, I'm just kidding. You're good. Let's do it all that way. All right, is that it? Oh.
It's wishful thinking, Mayor.
All right, Mr. Locke. How much more we got?
3, 4, 5, 6 more.
Six. 6 more?
They're not all me.
We ready.
This presentation will cover the capital improvement projects that are included in the FY18 budget. This first slide shows a summary of where the funding will come from. So there's a total proposed of $15 million, and for instance, almost $6 million will come from bonds, $1.5 million from property tax, a textile reimbursement, drainage fund contribution, and the PEG fund. This shows a summary of the capital improvement projects related to the general fund. This is a summary of each of the projects. On the left-hand side, you'll see the name of the project, and across the columns from left to right, you'll see the funding source for each one of those projects. So for the Rosewood Extension project, you'll see $3 million of the expense will be covered by grants, $635,000 by property tax, $1.4 million by a TxDOT reimbursement, $750,000 from the drainage fund, for a total of $5.8 million. And this is just for FY18. These are just expenses related to FY18. And then at the bottom, you'll see the total of the proposed CIPs for the general fund. Next has a little more detail of each one of those projects. So for the Rosewood Extension, you'll see under funding sources, the list of funding sources. And the next column over shows the previous year activity. So we're through FY17, we're estimating that there will be a little over $1 million of expenses related to the Rosewood project. And FY18, where the proposed budget includes $5.8 million. And FY19, $2.1 million. We're estimating the project will be finished at FY19, so there will be no future year expenses. And the final column there shows the total cost. So at this time, the Rosewood project is estimated to cost around $9 million. This is the Heritage Oaks Hike and Bike Trail, estimating $308,000 of expenses through the end of FY17. The proposed budget includes $2.6 million of expenses for the project. This project will carry over into FY19, and we're estimating approximately $1.5 million in FY19 for a total project cost of $4.4 million. The next project is the Stagecoach reconstruction. So far, the project has incurred $19.3 million in expenses. In FY18, we're estimating $1.1 million in expenses towards the reconstruction project for total expenses of $20.4 million. The next item is the City Council chamber renovation. This will be funded by two different sources. The PEG fund is able to fund equipment that's allowable through that restricted funding source, and the contribution of property tax that'll be moved into the CIP fund will cover $196,000 of it. The $300,000 is really a placeholder. We haven't received all the bids on what the equipment will cost to renovate the city council chambers. So right now, that's just a placeholder so that there are funds budgeted when we receive those bids. Most of the Tremere project will be completed during FY17. So you'll see through FY17, total cost of $7.4 million, estimating about $350,000 of expense in 18 to close out the project. There are some repairs needed to the Family Aquatics pool surface. Those repairs are estimated to be $300,000. There's also a need for some pump maintenance at the facility. So there's a total of $350,000 proposed in the FY18 budget to address these needs that will be covered with bonds. That completes the general fund projects. Next are the water and sewer projects. And this is a summary of each one of the projects and the funding source. All of these projects will be covered by bonds. The total amount is $2.3 million. The first project is the water line rehab, phase 2. That project's incurred $300,000, or estimated to, through the end of FY17. The budget includes $932,000 and FY18 expenses for a total project cost of $1.2 million. There's 18-inch sewer gravity main that will have expenses of $231,000 through the end of FY17. And the budget for 18 is $785,000 for a total project cost of a little over $1 million. The SSES sewer line evaluation phase 5. SSES stands for Sanitary Sewer Evaluation Study. There's estimated to spend about $50,000 through the end of this fiscal year, and the continuation of that will incur $350,000 in FY18. There are a collection of small water improvements, water system improvements to increase capacity and improve operations that is budgeted in FY18 at a cost of $203,000. The Tremere Creek gravity main includes $111,456,000 in the FY18 budget, and the total project will be a little over $161,000. That's all for water and sewer. Now for the drainage. I'm sorry.
Mr. Harris.
I guess I noticed I kept seeing the word bonds on there as far as the funding source. Were those bonds already obtained in previous years, or are we just?
It was the last water and sewer bond issue in 2013. So these were projects that identified in the master plan that needed to be completed. And so the answer to your question is yes.
Okay, so we're still using that bond money to take care of what we're taking care of.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Mrs. Fleming.
Yes, it just sparked a question in my mind, David, and I don't know if you'll be able to answer this. Where are we right now in the I got to phrase this exactly right. Where are we now in the figures of paying off our bonds? What year do you estimate that we'll be done paying off our bonds? Just to throw it out there somewhere. Somewhere out there.
If we would not issue any more bonds citywide, I believe that the city would pay all of its bonds off in somewhere around 2037, 2038, somewhere around there. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
All right. You're good.
There are three projects slated for the drainage fund. It's the South Nolan Creek, the Cosper Ridge Estates, and the Valley Ditch. The total cost of the project are $1.1 million. The bulk of it will be covered by bonds, $822,000, and the drainage fund will be contributed $320,000 towards the projects. The South Nolan Creek is an ongoing project. Through FY17, it's estimated that the project, we would have spent $870,000 towards the project. There's $762,000 in the FY18 budget for a total project cost of $1.6 million. The Cosper Ridge Estate is to repair a sinkhole that is developing over some storm drainage and 2 sewer lines. The drainage fund will contribute all of the funding for this project of $320,000. And the Valley Ditch is also an ongoing project. Through FY17, estimated close to $105,000 in expenses. In 18, there's budgeted close to $60,000, and the project will carry over into 19 with an estimated cost of $138,000.
Mr. Mayor,
Mr. Rivera.
do you have an idea when the Valley Ditch project is going to be over with?
If there's nothing, if there's no funds budgeted in FY19, then the project will be completed in FY18. Or were you asking about a specific project?
No, just about that.
Yes, sir. So in general, as you look at the project, if there's nothing budgeted in FY19, that means we're estimating this will be complete in 18. If there is nothing in future years, then that means that FY19 would be the last.
And the reason I'm asking is because the Rand Seer, we spoke in the past. Thank you.
Yeah. There were some decision packages that were submitted along the CIP type projects that were disapproved by the city manager. There was actually, I think there were quite a few of them, so I won't read through them all, but they're listed there that has all of the projects that were submitted and disapproved.
Comments, questions? Nope, we're good. Next. Got it again. Just glue your feet up there.
This covers debt service. So debt service makes up 13% of the city's overall expenses. You look at the debt service fund, and this is looking at our tax-supported debt. From the revenue side, we'll receive $14.6 million from property tax, $1.6 million from the TxDOT pass-through payment reimbursement, and a little bit of interest for a total revenue budget of $16.4 million. This slide shows the debt service payments that will be made. So there'll be a total of $7.5 million in interest payments, $8 million in principal payments, for total debt-related expenses of $15.7 million. The water and sewer fund makes debt service from within the fund. So the amount that you see there, the $6.1 million, is coming from the water and sewer revenues that are received. Debt service for the water and sewer fund will be $1.8 million in interest and $4.3 million in principal. Total debt-related expenses, $6.1 million. The solid waste fund is the same way as the water and sewer fund. The debt service is covered from solid waste revenues. That'll be $719,000. And this shows the budgeted principal and interest payments that'll be made in FY18 for a total budget of $719,000. Drainage debt is covered by the drainage revenues, total of $541,000. The total debt service related payments for the drainage fund next fiscal year will be $541,341. The last fund is the hotel occupancy tax fund. These are covered by the hotel occupancy tax revenues. Total was $722,000 in FY18. It'll be $295,000 in interest payments and $425,000 in principal payments, for a total budget of a little over $722,000.
Comments, questions? All right, none. Continue on. You're done. Wow. Leslie, Mrs. Hinkle, welcome back.
Not me, it should be CDBG and home grants, or does he need to do? Should be special revenue, CDBG and home. Okay, cool. Okay. So I'm going to talk about the CDBG and the home program, the grant portion. The mission of the Community Development Department is to administer sub-grants to qualifying agencies. The mission elements are to provide technical assistance for selecting those sub-grantees, compliance monitoring for sub-grantees' performance, and the required reporting for the grantees. Our metrics, you'll see there, persons that were assisted with the CDBG and home program, almost 3,000. Homes purchased with the home program, 5. Homes rehabilitated with CDBG program, 4. Public facilities improved with the CDBG program, 5. Tenant-based rental assistance units assisted, 76. And persons assisted with elderly transportation, 166. Our goals going into next year are to maintain those CDBG and home program grant requirements with the reduced staffing levels, to continue to provide housing rehabilitation to eligible households, to provide first-time home buyer benefits to eligible households, and to provide elderly transportation services to eligible persons. So how does community development grant fit into the enterprise with its staffing? 100% FTEs are in that fund, and 0.31% FTEs in the enterprise. And how does the grant portion fit into the budget in the enterprise? 100% is expended in the special revenue fund, and 1.14 of the expenses in the enterprise. Staffing, you'll see, before it's 1-1. That's because this year we're moving some of the costs from the general fund into the special revenue funds. And revenues there, you'll see, of $1,229,395, and the expense budget will be the same. Explanation, change in the federal funding level for CDBG allocation, change in the funding level from the Area Agency on Aging transportation due to a decrease in the number of rides, and then change in uncompleted prior year projects that are going to be moving forward. This shows you the home grant revenue budget, $818,646, and balanced with the expense side of $818,646. Explanation there for you. And no decision packages approved or disapproved by the city manager.
Let me.
Ms. Engel, I had just one question for you. Remember the other day we were discussing about elderly transportation? Is that what you mean when you said about changing the decrease in number of rides taken? Is that what you were talking about?
All right. Any other comments, questions? All right.
I believe I have the next one as well. Should be Killeen Civic and Conference Center. Okay. So the Killeen Civic and Conference Center is funded out of the Hotel Occupancy Tax Fund. The mission of the conference center is to manage the public event space that's available at the convention and exhibition facilities, which does include the rodeo grounds and the special events center, as well, obviously, as the Civic and Conference Center. The mission elements are pretty simple. We market and book events, event planning and coordination of those events, event setup and support, and facility cleaning and the maintenance. Here are our metrics. Facilitated the dedication of the Fordham Memorial project. The number of events booked so far is 637. Catering fees collected, you'll see the numbers there. Rental equipment, the number of hotel rooms and the number of hotels, the number of conventions that we have contracts for so far, and hotel rooms occupied during those conventions. Next page is a little more of the numbers. Event planning and coordination. We did add credit card payment options this year for alcohol sales, which have increased. We've added a craft beer selection for our clients that do select alcohol for their events. And we added SurveyMonkey for event follow-up with our clients to make sure that we're doing a good job. For event setup and support, we replaced with the new sound system in the ballrooms, and we replaced a 14-year-old marquee that just went kaput. Facility cleaning and maintenance, we've made electrical upgrades at the rodeo arena and installed a new gate near the concession stand for security and installed new carpet in some of the meeting rooms. We have very ambitious goals for 17 and 18. Improve our marketing efforts, develop strategies to promote Killeen as a premier city for conventions, conferences, reunions, and other meetings. Continue to conduct hospitality training to the hospitality and service industry. I saw in the paper we're getting a new hotel, or not a new hotel, but a different ownership. So we'll be reaching out to them to offer some hospitality training for them once they're up and running. Continue to build those relationships with the hoteliers and encourage staff to utilize Convention and Visitors Bureau services. I always say, if you've got any meeting that you want to bring to Killeen, please come talk to us. Market the city as a tourist destination and develop new client brochures and facility information. So how does the staff fit into the enterprise? 100%. And overall, the FTEs in the enterprise would be 1.05. The budget would be 55.93 of the expenses in the fund, and then 0.71 of those expenses in the enterprise. Staffing looks like this. 15-16, we had 14. We do have one unfunded position, which is the conference center manager position. So we're at 13.5 proposed. Our revenues, you'll see, of $1,272,163, and the expenses of $1,272,163. And we reduced some materials and supply accounts by a little over $100,000 to be within our budget cap. There were no decision packages approved or denied by the city manager.
Mr. Harris.
I have to ask a question with the alcohol sales and everything like that. I know the city buys all the alcohol and all the beverages and everything, and then we contract out with jesters.
Yes.
I guess I have to, just make sure I'm not thinking the wrong percentage. What percentage of the sales, whatever, do we give to jesters?
I believe they get 40% of the sales.
Okay.
And I will
So-
double check that.
Okay, I think that's what I saw as well, though, but you can still double check. But I guess my question is, if we buy all the alcohol and everything, what do they do to warrant 40%? I mean, maybe I just don't know the ins and outs of it, but
They're providing all the labor, so they provide all the bartenders for all of the events, for every function that KC3 supports,
okay.
and insurance and some other
Well, they
functions.
have their own insurance and everything?
Yes.
Okay, so we don't pay any, okay. All right.
We have our insurance for the center.
Yeah, in
that
general,
That
yes.
includes an alcohol portion, but they're covering their own employees, their bartenders, while they're on site.
Okay. All right, thank you, ma'am.
Mr. Kilpatrick.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Two real quick things. I noticed on what's been done, what about the replacing the walls?
We're in the middle of that right now.
I thought it was going to be done by July, but okay.
I did too. They had a delay in some of the materials, so it's basically taken 5 weeks off of our calendar. But they started Monday, actually, and so the walls are coming down, and it is looking good.
Good deal. Okay. And this one, as far as the city manager, I would like to propose that the $85,000 for the National Mounted Warfare Foundation, that's an investment. That's probably going to be the best investment we're going to get for downtown revitalization. That's going to be 1.2 miles away from downtown. The closest hotel is approximately 4.1 mile of any size. When this National Warfare Foundation is about 82% funded now. They're getting closer and closer. They're anticipating it could be, if it puts on the same model of Fort Benning, around anywhere from 150 to 200,000 people a year coming in to see that. Where are they going to eat and where are they going to stay is basically going to be the closest areas. It'll infuse money that we can really revitalize downtown with that. Now, I would like to see the city of Killeen, who's going to get the greatest economic impact of that, continue to show support and provide for it, rather than to, I would do that rather than to give it to some other investments toward a economic development. That is going to be the major economic development for downtown. Just my opinion. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. City Manager.
My reasons for disapproving that in that format was, I don't have a complete understanding of this, but my understanding is that we cannot use hot tax for that. So if we were to support the museum, we'd have to find a revenue source other than hot tax to make that happen. We need some probably legal advice to make sure that I'm correct on that, but I don't disagree with the benefits of having supporting the museum. I just question the revenue source for getting that done.
That's good.
Yeah, and that's important because originally when Bell County came in reference to increasing our hotel motel tax, I think they spoke, about in our behalf, because originally it was turned down and then it came back, and I remember that was, we even had a resolution. If you look back, there's a resolution that's part of that. And so whether we use it directly from that revenue, but maybe use it, free up some other revenue, but yeah, I remember that was kind of the whole purpose of it, so.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Johnson.
I have a question. It's one of those questions. I travel throughout the country. I visit about 9 different cities a year, and I always take the opportunity to meet with counterparts. One of the things that I've noticed out of every city I visit, the CVB is up there as a core department as it relates to quality of life and economic development. And I see here we have a convention services manager and association sales manager. When you think about those people that are in those positions, I think they're a untapped revenue source. They have a lot of potential, and so I'm wondering when will our CVB be able to take their proper role?
Right now, they have been focusing on getting conventions to Killeen. That's been their primary focus. They also go out and do that hospitality training. I think they would like to explore some other options as well. So that's something that I'm sure the city manager and we can visit about, maybe what their role is in the future.
Even when you think about it, a couple weeks ago we had the Caribbean Festival. That festival alone should have drawn thousands of people to our city to have a good time, stay in our hotels, eat at our restaurants, and also see almost like a lack of what's the word?
Promotion?
Communication, partnership. I got a couple calls from a couple of hotel owners, and they did not know that certain events were taking place. I don't know if it was a tournament or something. So is that something that's coordinated within the CVB? Does every department put on their own events? Do they do the marketing? Do they go out and lobby for their own tournaments? Or,
I think there's a combination of things going on. I think if the Convention and Visitors Bureau staff are trying to get conventions that are hosted at the convention center, then they're going to know about all those things. They don't know about all those festivals. And I think that better communication with community services and the Chamber of Commerce and all those other agencies out there that are putting on those festivals that may or may not be sponsored by the city in some form.
But isn't
we
it
can do a better job?
Isn't it in our city's best interest to have all that coordinated, and where you got one person or one department that knows everything that's going on and they have a support system?
Yes. I think it would be a challenge, but I think we could do it. There's so many projects and festivals and fundraisers and you name it that go on throughout the city. You look on Facebook on the 254 Free. There's always something going on. So trying to wrap, I have two people that work CVB, so they would need to develop some sort of maybe community calendar. I know that's been talked about before. Maybe that would be a start for that. But a better coordination is, there's a lot of good stuff going on. It's just trying to get the message out there to everybody.
It's just small things like that kind of frustrate me. And a lot of times folks misunderstand me when I say that I'm opposed to transportation fees or property taxes. It's not that I'm opposed to that. That's just the last result. And I like to try to maximize all these other revenue sources before we consider that. And it just frustrates me that we're so quick to want to do a street fee or whatever the case, and we have all of these gaps in revenues. Just lost opportunities.
All right, anybody else? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Mrs. Shine.
Mayor, you haven't been checking your texts this evening, but I just need to remind everyone to use their microphones, please.
Yeah.
A little late in the evening for that. I tried the city manager also, but nobody was reading.
So make sure you speak into the mic there.
Yes, sir. I talk very loud anyway, so. This one's quick. We've mentioned a little bit before what the Public Education Government PEG channel is, what we call it, the government channel, is going to attempt to accomplish this year. So I'll just roll you through this pretty quickly. Basically, it provides access to the city about city events, city projects, city services through a government channel, which is Spectrum Cable Channel 10. And it supports the improvements that are necessary in order to make that happen. So basically, it pays for equipment and capital improvements. And our goal for 17-18 is going to be a complete renovation of council chambers to include all new technology. We are in the sort of infantile stages of putting that plan together, getting some concepts drawn up, and so we'll have a lot more information for you here sometime soon. And it's going to be a little bit painful, meaning we're going to have to move out of that facility for some period of time before we can move back into it permanently. So here you can see some information. The first thing I want to tell you is that we get a 1% additional fee from Spectrum Cable Channel 10 through a state government channel franchise. And that amounts to a little over $200,000 a year. So that account right now has a balance of about $760,000. And those funds, again, are restricted. They're restricted to use for the government channel and its development operations. So we've gone through some changes. We were funding some expenses out of the cable channel that are more appropriately handled out of the general fund, and so they were moved this year, but that also allowed us to create some capacity to do what we believe is going to be a pretty expensive project at for the council chambers. So you can see here that the expenses, those we'll talk about a little bit more in detail on the next slide, that we were expending each year. We're transitioning that to capital, which is the $300,000 amount. John pointed to that earlier in the capital fund, as well as $50,000, and that would be smaller equipment such as cameras, microphones, accessory type things that'll be necessary to make it work. So the expense variance change there is moving those positions out of the partial funding through the PEG fund and into the general fund. And then now this year, putting some money aside or into the appropriate account for the council chamber project.
Mr. Johnson?
Is there still plans for a storage closet so I can meet with citizens? I'm tired of meeting citizens at coffee shops.
That's going to be a question for the city manager because that's bigger than just the council chambers. I think that's a plan in City Hall. Oh, he was asking about meeting space for council members.
I believe that when we remodel the city council chambers and we're going to move HR out, we're going to do some shuffling over there. I think we're going to be able to create an office space for city council in the city hall. I think we can get that done. Now, I'm not planning on doing any remodeling. We'll just do a reassignment of space. So I think we're going to be able to get that done.
Yeah, I mean, it can just be just a simple room with a desk and a coffee pot.
Yeah, and
I don't know about the coffee pot, but everything else we can get you.
Maybe a Keurig.
You'll have to buy your own ground.
You're leaving? I don't have a question. Yes.
That's it. Yeah.
This has the potential.
Last one for you or the last one for everybody?
Last one for the.
Oh, wow.
This is just a collection of all the remaining special revenue funds. There are 5 funds listed here. These funds don't have anything to do with one another as far as what their purpose is. It's just a collection to share with City Council the remaining of the special revenue funds. The ones listed are all either donations or grant, except for the tax increment fund. And, as you see, we're estimating a total revenue into that fund will be $229,000 in FY18. These are the proposed expenses for each one of those funds, and there's no funds being budgeted in the tax increment fund. So the total expenses for all of those funds is just under $600,000.
Comments, questions? All right. Everybody's busy writing. All right. City Manager, what's left?
Well, first of all, I want to acknowledge and thank the council for the dedication and attention you paid to the budget. I think over the past 3 work sessions, we've had a comprehensive review of the budget. You should understand, contained in these books and in the presentations we've made, is everything there is to know about the city's budget and the city's finances. So at this point, we're done. Staff is pretty well done with the explanation and presentation of the budget, and
Well,
now we go into the public hearing
Public hearing.
process and the council deliberation and so forth.
No, and I just want to say, I think it's great. This is a great way to present it. I think this is the first time I've ever seen it this way. It's a great format. Each department, you know, the way they, you know, parts approved by the city manager, decline and all that, and it was good. It gives us a better understanding. A lot more stuff, but I think that it gives us as a council member, at least me, a much better understanding of what's going on and stuff. So, all right, with that, I think we're done. Mr. Rivera.
I just got a comment, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Sir, to be honest with you, this is my 9th municipal lead budget process. And this is the first time, to be honest with you, that everything was more crystal clear in the beginning and the end, just like the mayor said, especially for those items that, for one reason or the other, you disapprove for now, but at least give us an understanding during the year for the next year or two to see what we should be looking at, not only what we just went through, but what may be pending coming up in the future year. And for me, it was very, very basic compared to what I've seen in the past. I want to thank you all for doing this, you and your staff. I know it took a lot of hours to put this together.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yeah, and also just to kind of finish up here, but I appreciate you going out too and then presenting it out in the community even beforehand, because I know that you've been out there doing that too, and explaining it to everybody, met on one, the media and everything. So anybody that has any questions, you know, there's no doubt that, you know, they'll get the very transparent outlook from it, and we appreciate that. So great job.
Motion to adjourn?
Motion adjourned, second. All those in favor, just say aye.
Aye.
We're done.